Hey guys, imagine this. It's 1607 and you're one of the first settlers in Jamestown, Virginia, dreaming of gold, glory, and maybe a nice plot of land. But instead of striking it rich, you're knee-deep in swamps, starving, and surrounded by desperate men who haven't seen a woman in months. Enter the dark underbelly. Prostitution wasn't just a side hustle. It was the glue holding this fragile colony together. Or should I say, the rot eating it from the inside? Buckle up, because today we're peeling back the layers of colonial America's so-called purity to reveal a world where survival meant selling your soul, one absurd transaction at a time. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Colonial America, the land of opportunity, where pilgrims sought religious freedom, merchants chased fortunes, and everyone pretended morality was as crisp as a Puritan collar. But let's cut the Founding Fathers' mythology for a second and talk about the women who kept the wheels turning in the shadows. Prostitution? Oh, it wasn't some scandalous import from wicked old Europe. It was baked right into the colonies from day one. Picture Jamestown, a muddy hellhole where 104 men and boys arrived in 1607, only to watch most of them drop dead from disease, starvation, or Native American arrows. By 1609, the starving time had reduced them to eating boots, rats, and whisper at each other. Survival was a joke, a cruel punchline from history's twisted comedian. And into this mess, women started trickling in, not as pious helpmeets, but as commodities. The Virginia Company, those savvy businessmen back in London, realized their all-male utopia was a flop. So, they shipped over young women to make wives, as they called them, mail-order brides for the desperate. But here's the ironic twist. Many of these women weren't exactly blushing virgins. Some were plucked from London streets, reformed pickpockets, or yes, former prostitutes, bundled up and sent across the Atlantic like unwanted luggage. Imagine the absurdity. Congratulations, lass, you're off to the new world to civilize these savages by marrying one and popping out kids before malaria gets you. Dark? Absolutely. But that's the pain of it. Survival meant adapting to a system that saw women as tools, not people. Fast forward a bit, and by the 1620s, these tobacco brides were auctioned off to the highest bidder. A man paid 120 pounds of tobacco, about a year's crop, for a wife. Romantic, right? But not all women played along. Some, facing abuse, abandonment, or just the sheer brutality of frontier life, turned to the oldest profession. Why? Because in a world where women's wages were a pittance, if they got paid at all, prostitution offered a sliver of independence. Low wages for seamstresses or servants. Check. Husbands dying left and right from Indian raids or fever? Double check. And let's not forget the influx of sailors in port towns like Boston or Philadelphia, flush with rum money and months of pent-up frustration. Taverns became the unofficial brothels, where a barmaid could pour ale with one hand and negotiate extras with the other. Oh, the hypocrisy. Puritans preached fire and brimstone on Sundays, but come Monday, they turned a blind eye to the disorderly houses popping up like weeds. Comment below. If you were a colonial woman, would you risk the lash for a shot at controlling your own fate? Tell me your survival strategy. I bet it'll be wilder than mine. Let's zoom in on Virginia, the cradle of American absurdity. In Williamsburg, the colonial capital, life was a mix of powdered wigs and hidden vices. Take Susanna Allen, a tavern owner in the early 1700s. She ran a place where ale flowed, cards were dealt, and, gasp, men and women mingled in ways that raised eyebrows. In 1713, the court fined her 500 pounds of tobacco for keeping a disorderly house, code for prostitution under her roof. But get this, the married man caught in the act, not a slap on the wrist. And Susanna, her tavern license got renewed every year until she died in 1720. Talk about survival through sheer audacity. She navigated fines, court appearances, and societal sneers, all while keeping her business afloat in a man's world. The pain here is palpable. Women like her weren't glamorous madams. They were scrappers, dodging vagrancy laws that could land them in stocks or worse. Virginia's 1797 vagrancy statutes targeted lewd women, but enforcement was a farce depending on who complained. If your indiscretions didn't disturb the neighbors, you might skate by. But if a nosy Puritan got wind, public shaming awaited like standing on a stool with a sign around your neck, as happened to Hannah Dilley in 1753 Boston. For permitting lewdness in my husband's house, it read. Husband's house, mind you, not hers. The irony drips like colonial molasses, and oh, the absurdity of it all in New England, where piety met pragmatism in a hilarious collision. Boston, that beacon of moral rectitude, had its share of bawdy houses. Cotton Mather, the witch hunt enthusiast, tried to rally a posse against them in the early 1700s, but the public yawned and moved on. Why? Because prostitution was seen as a necessary evil, straight out of St. Augustine's playbook. Better to let sailors blow off steam with fallen women than risk them seducing your virtuous daughters. Dark truth. This mindset protected the elite while dooming the poor. Women entered the trade young, often 15 to 27, peaking at 19, driven by poverty or seduction, promises gone wrong. A man might whisper sweet nothings about marriage to get what he wanted, then vanish, leaving her ruined in a society that valued virginity like gold. Courts sometimes punished these seducers, but rarely. In one case, from Colonial, Virginia, a blacksmith was fined 5 shillings for skipping church, but zilch for keeping a prostitute. Priorities, am I right? The pain of survival? These women faced venereal diseases rampant among soldiers and sailors, with no antibiotics in sight. Syphilis could rot your nose off, gonorrhea leave you sterile, and society? They'd blame you, not the system that funneled infected men your way. Shift gears to the southern colonies, where the heat wasn't just from the sun. Charleston, South Carolina, dubbed the Holy City for its churches, was also a hotbed of vice. Chalmers Street was lined with bordellos, including the infamous Pink House, built in 1690 and rumored to host all sorts of entertainments. Sailors from the bustling port flooded in, turning taverns into pickup spots. But here's the sarcastic kicker. While the gentry sipped tea and debated liberty, enslaved women and poor whites bore the brunt. Prostitution intersected with slavery in ugly ways. Some enslaved women were forced into it by masters, a dark truth buried under layers of historical whitewashing. Survival meant enduring exploitation with no legal recourse. If you were caught, fines or lashes awaited, but owners often protected their property. Absurd. Utterly. Comment time. What's the most hypocritical thing about colonial society you've heard so far? Drop it below and let's roast history together. Keeps the retention high, folks. Now, let's talk importation, because nothing says land of the free like shipping women across oceans against their will. In 1721, the French dumped 80 women in Louisiana, many with prostitution raps, figuring they'd civilize the wild colony. But irony alert, these ladies found more freedom in the sex trade than in forced marriages to rough frontiersmen. As one historian quipped, Louisiana's elite families trace back to fecund brides, not the infertile prostitutes. Yet who really built the place? The pain, isolation, disease, and the constant threat of violence. In New Amsterdam, later New York, Dutch tolerance meant prostitution thrived casually. But when the English took over, Puritan vibes clamped down, sort of. Taverns still hummed with illicit deals, and during the Revolutionary War, it exploded. Camp followers trailed armies, washing, cooking, and yes, providing comforts. George Washington grumbled about it, deducting pay from diseased soldiers. But the absurdity? These women kept morale up in a war for freedom, while society branded them whores. Dark survival. Many died of exposure or illness, forgotten footnotes in patriotic tales. Pushing into the mid-1700s, as cities grew, so did the trade. Philadelphia, Ben Franklin's playground, had its red light whispers in alleys and theaters. Franklin himself penned satirical pieces on old women versus young, hinting at the era's casual attitudes. But for the women, low wages in factories or as servants, maybe $1 a month, pushed them toward quicker cash. The Industrial Revolution loomed, but in colonial times it was still artisanal desperation. A widow with kids, prostitution, or starve. An indentured servant fleeing abuse? Same deal. Laws were patchy. Massachusetts Vagrancy Acts from 1797 snagged nightwalkers, but bribes to constables kept doors open. Police corruption? Already a thing, officers took cuts, leading to riots where citizens torched brothels. In 1793 New York, a whorehouse riot saw mobs storming dens, a mix of moral outrage and mob fun. Painful irony, the same folks decrying sin profited from it. Let's humanize this with stories, because history's nightmares are personal. Take Rachel Rodewell in 1741 York County, Virginia. Charged with a disorderly house, she fought in court, posting bond for good behavior. Survival meant lawyering up in a wigged world. Or Joan Clark, same year, guilty and bonded, her life a tightrope over societal abyss. These weren't villains. They were survivors in a game rigged against them. Ages 15 to 27, entering late teens, facing a lifespan shortened by disease or violence. Venereal woes? Rampant. Sanger's later 1858 study estimated 1 in 52 men with a prostitute connection, 40% diseased. Colonial docs had mercury cures that poisoned more than healed. Absurd remedy, blue pills that turned your teeth black. Comment, if you could time travel, what advice would you give these women? Share below. Your ideas might spark a revolution. As we wrap this first leg of our journey, wait, no, we're just warming up. The colonies expanded, and so did the contradictions. In the Carolinas, rice plantations bred wealth and vice, with port towns like Savannah echoing Charleston's chaos. Women of color, free or enslaved, navigated even darker paths, often coerced into sex work by economic chains. The pain, no escape, no justice. Yet some carved niches, like in New Orleans' early days, where French influences made it slightly less hypocritical. But overall, colonial America was a farce of freedom, where all men are created equal forgot half the population. Sarcastic nod to the founding fathers. Thanks for the declaration, guys, but your taverns told a different story. We've scratched the surface, Jamestown's desperation, Virginia's court farces, Boston's pious blind spots. But hold on, because part 2 dives deeper into the Revolutionary era's explosions, where war turned prostitution into a battlefield necessity. If this hooked you, smash that like, subscribe for the next parts, and comment your thoughts. What's the biggest historical absurdity so far? Where are you watching from, and what's the time? Let's keep the conversation alive. Your engagement fuels this nightmare tour. Until next time, survive the present by learning from the past's pains. Alright, buckle up, because we're diving back into the grim, absurd, and downright ironic world of colonial America's underbelly. Part 2 of our sordid tale about prostitution in the New World. The Revolutionary War is about to kick off, and with it comes a whole new level of chaos, desperation, and survival that makes the previous century look like a warm-up act. Picture this. It's the 1770s, and the colonies are buzzing with talk of liberty. But in the shadows of those patriotic speeches, women are navigating a brutal reality where freedom is a luxury most can't afford. This is a story of camp followers, red light alleys, and the founding fathers' dirty little secrets, all served with a side of biting sarcasm and a nod to the pain of survival. Let's get into it. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on how you'd survive this mess, and let's keep the history roast going. The 1770s hit like a musket ball to the chest. The colonies are on fire, figuratively and sometimes literally, as tensions with Britain boil over. The Continental Army's forming, cities are swelling, and ports are crawling with soldiers, sailors, and merchants with coins to burn and morals to bend. Prostitution? It's not just surviving, it's thriving in this war-torn mess. Why? Because war is the ultimate aphrodisiac for desperation. Armies need supplies, morale, and, yup, women. Enter the camp followers, the unsung heroines and victims of the Revolutionary War. These women trailed behind Washington's ragtag troops, cooking, sewing, washing, and let's not kid ourselves, providing other services to keep the soldiers from deserting. The absurdity? These women were vital to the war effort, yet history paints them as parasites or worse. Imagine trudging through snow with a musket heavier than your dreams, frostbite gnawing your toes, and your only income coming from a soldier's halfpenny for a quick tumble in a tent. Survival wasn't just pain, it was a daily middle finger to a society that needed you but despised you. Let's set the scene in New York, 1776. The British have taken Manhattan, and it's a playground for redcoats and Hessian mercenaries. Brothels spring up faster than smallpox. especially in the Holy Ground, a notorious red light district near Trinity Church, because nothing says irony like sinning in the shadow of a steeple. The area is packed with taverns, boarding houses, and ladies of negotiable affection. As one cheeky historian put it, British officers, flush with coin, turned these spots into their personal pleasure domes. One Madam Mary Carson ran a house so infamous that soldiers queued up like they were waiting for rations. But here's the dark twist. These women weren't living large. Rent was extortionate. Landlords knew they could gouge women with no legal protection. Disease was a constant specter. Syphilis and gonorrhea spread like gossip, and cures like mercury ointments were as likely to kill as heal. The pain? A 20-year-old like Sarah, a real woman from court records, entered the trade after her husband died at Bunker Hill. By 1778, she was dead too, not from battle, but from disease contracted in the Holy Ground. Survival meant gambling with your life every night. Now, let's talk Philadelphia, the heart of the revolution and a hotbed of hypocrisy. While Ben Franklin and his pals debated liberty in 1776, the city's alleys were a maze of vice. Dock Street was the go-to spot, where sailors and soldiers mingled with women who had no other options. Franklin, that sly old fox, wasn't above dabbling himself. His letters hint at evenings of amusement with women of lesser repute. Oh, Ben, you kite-flying charmer, preaching thrift while tossing coins in the dark. The absurdity peaks when you realize the Continental Congress, sitting in Philly, passed laws against lewd behavior while ignoring the brothels servicing their own troops. Why? Because war demanded pragmatism over piety. Camp followers, often widows or runaway servants, followed armies for protection and profit. They'd wash shirts by day, then slip into soldiers' tents by night. Records from Valley Forge show Washington grumbling about loose women spreading disease, docking soldiers' pay if they caught the clap. But did he shut it down? Nope. The army needed these women to function, even if it meant turning a blind eye to the necessary evil. Comment below. If you were Washington, would you crack down on camp followers or let them slide? What's your call and why? Swing south to Charleston, where the war turned the city into a pressure cooker. By 1780, the British occupied it, and the sex trade exploded. Enslaved women, free women of color, and poor whites worked the docks, where British soldiers spent freely. The Pink House on Chalmers Street, still kicking, now catering to redcoats instead of colonists. The dark truth, slavery made this uglier. Enslaved women were often forced into prostitution by masters who pocketed the profits. Court records from 1779 mention an enslaved woman, Sissy, hired out for sex by her owner, a respectable merchant by day. No charges for him, of course, just a fine for her lewdness. The pain of survival here is gut-wrenching. No agency, no escape, just a body commodified for someone else's gain. Yet some women, free or not, carved out slivers of power. A madam named Eliza, documented in 1781, ran a house for British officers, negotiating terms and bribing constables to stay open. She died wealthy but shunned, a paradox of success in a world that branded her a sinner. Let's not forget Boston, where Puritan ghosts still haunted the streets. The war brought an influx of soldiers, and with them, a boom in disorderly houses. Ann Street, later infamous as the Black Sea, was already a hub by 1775. Women like Mary Williams, a 19-year-old servant, turned to prostitution after her employer, a patriot, fled during the British siege. Court records show her fined 10 shillings in 1776 for entertaining soldiers. But the real kicker? Her landlord, a church deacon, kept renting to her. Hypocrisy alert, the same elites railing against vice were profiting from it. The absurdity deepens when you consider the British soldiers, who saw Boston as a backwater compared to London's flesh pots. They brought a taste for organized brothels, and local women adapted fast. Survival meant reading the room or the regiment and cashing in before the next battle. But the pain? Venereal disease was so rampant that British commanders issued health checks for women, a grim precursor to later regulations. Mercury treatments left women toothless or worse, while society whispered they deserved it. Zoom out to the broader colonies, and the war's chaos amplified everything. In rural areas, taverns doubled as brothels where a barmaid might serve ale and extras for a price. In 1777, a Virginia tavern keeper, John Smith, yes, really, was fined for permitting lewd women in his establishment, but he was back in business a week later. Why? Because the local militia needed a place to unwind. The war economy made prostitution a lifeline for women left behind, widows, orphans, or those fleeing abusive masters. Indentured servants, often young women from England or Ireland, faced 7-year contracts that felt like prison sentences. Run away? You'd be hunted down. Stay? You might be coerced into sex work by a master who saw you as property. The dark irony, the revolution's cry for liberty, didn't extend to these women. Comment time. What's the most infuriating double standard you've heard so far? Drop it below and let's unpack the founding fathers' selective blindness. The war also brought a new player, the Hessian mercenaries. These German soldiers, hired by the British, were notorious for their appetites. In New Jersey, 1777, locals complained about Hessians turning farmhouses into makeshift brothels. One woman, Margaret Klein, was arrested for consorting with them, but her defense? She was feeding her kids after her husband was killed at Trenton. Survival trumped shame, but the cost was brutal, public whipping or banishment for some. Yet these women weren't just victims, some were hustlers. In New York, a group of women ran a floating brothel on a barge in the Hudson, dodging land-based crackdowns. Talk about entrepreneurial spirit. The absurdity. While patriots toasted to freedom, these women navigated a war zone to make a living, only to be erased from the victory parades. Let's humanize this with a story from 1778 Philadelphia. Meet Lydia, a 22-year-old camp follower with the Continental Army. Her husband died at Brandywine, leaving her with a toddler and no money. She joined the Army's trail, washing clothes by day and turning tricks by night. A letter from a soldier describes her as cheerful but weary, trading services for food to keep her child alive. By 1779, she was gone, likely claimed by disease or winter's cold. Her story wasn't unique. Thousands of women like her were the war's invisible backbone, propping up an army that barely acknowledged them. The pain? No pensions, no recognition, just a society quick to judge. The sarcasm? Oh, thank you, Founding Fathers, for your lofty ideals while Lydia starved for your cause. As the war dragged on, cities like New York became open markets for vice. By 1781, the British evacuation left a vacuum, and American troops flooded in, keeping the sex trade humming. Brothels like Mary Carson's adapted to new clientele, proving that war changes flags, not human nature. The dark truth: prostitution wasn't a side effect of war, it was a pillar. Armies marched on their stomachs, sure, but also on the backs of women society scorned. And the elites? They knew. Governors, merchants, even clergy turned a blind eye when it suited them. In 1780 Boston, a minister was caught in a brothel raid, but pardoned because of his status. The women? Fined or jailed. Absurdity level, expert. We're not done yet. This war-fueled madness sets the stage for Part 3, where we'll explore how the new nation tried, and failed, to clean up its act. Spoiler, the hypocrisy only gets thicker. If you're hooked, smash that like, subscribe for the next parts, and comment. What's the wildest Revolutionary War story you've heard so far? Where are you watching from, and what's the vibe? Let's keep this history party alive. Your engagement keeps the fire burning. Until next time, survive the present by laughing at the past's absurdities. Alright, here we go, plunging back into the murky swamp of colonial America's hidden history. Part 3 of our sarcastic, gut-punching dive into the dark world of prostitution. The Revolutionary War's dust is settling. It's the 1780s, and the shiny new United States is trying to polish its image as a beacon of virtue. Spoiler alert, it's a facade, and the cracks are showing. The sex trade isn't just surviving, it's adapting, thriving, and mocking the new nation's lofty ideals with every clandestine transaction. From the bustling ports of New York to the pious streets of Boston, women are still navigating a brutal system where survival means playing dirty in a world that claims to be clean. Grab your metaphorical pitchforks because we're about to expose the absurdity, hypocrisy, and raw pain of a society pretending to be pure while profiting from its vices. Drop a comment below. What's the most ridiculous thing you think the Founding Fathers ignored? Let's roast history together. The war's over and it's 1783. The Treaty of Paris has made the U.S. Official, and everyone's drunk on freedom, or at least the idea of it. But freedom for whom? Not for the women working the docks, alleys, and taverns, where the sex trade is as American as apple pie. Sorry, pie enthusiasts. Cities are growing, and with them, the demand for entertainment. New York, now free of British boots, is a melting pot of sailors, merchants, and ex-soldiers with pockets full of continental dollars and nowhere to spend them but on vice. The holy ground near Trinity Church is still hopping, though the churchgoers clutch their pearls and pretend not to notice. Brothels are now semi-organized, with madams like Elizabeth Harper running tight ships. Harper, a real figure from 1785 court records, owned a house on Pearl Street, where she employed a dozen women, some as young as 16. Her secret, bribing constables and keeping a ledger of elite clients, insurance against raids. The absurdity, while Alexander Hamilton's debating federalism a few blocks away, Harper's running a business that's arguably more stable than the new government's currency. Survival meant outsmarting a system that needed you but wouldn't admit it. Let's swing to Philadelphia, the nation's temporary capital and a hotbed of post-war contradictions. The city's trying to shed its wartime grit, but Dock Street's still a neon sign for sin. Without the neon, of course, just flickering lanterns and whispered deals. Women like Margaret Jones, a 20-year-old widow, show up in 1787 court records, fined for keeping a bawdy house. Her crime? Renting rooms to women who serve as sailors. The kicker? Her landlord, a respected merchant, pocketed half her profits and walked free. The pain here is brutal. Margaret was a single mother, her husband killed in the war. Her options limited to sewing for pennies or managing a brothel for slightly more. She chose the latter, only to face public shaming, while her clients, senators, traders, even a judge or two, skipped away unscathed. The sarcasm drips, "Oh, glorious new republic, where all men are created equal, but women like Margaret are created to be scapegoats." Comment time. If you were Margaret, would you keep running the house or try to go respectable? Drop your strategy below. I'm dying to hear it. Boston's no better, clinging to its Puritan roots while drowning in its own hypocrisy. By the 1780s, Ann Street's reputation as a red light district is solid, with taverns doubling as pickup spots. Women like Abigail Turner, 19, appear in 1784 records, charged with lewd behavior after being caught with a sailor in a back room. Her punishment? A public whipping, 15 lashes, while the sailor paid a fine and sailed off. The dark truth: justice was a gendered joke. Men faced slaps on the wrist, women faced the whip or the stocks. But here's the absurd twist. Boston's elite needed these women. The city's economy leaned on maritime trade, and sailors wouldn't stick around without amusements. So authorities cracked down just enough to look moral, but not enough to kill the trade. In 1786, a raid on a North End brothel nabbed 6 women, but let the clients, described as gentlemen of standing, slip out the back. The pain? These women, often teenagers, faced disease, violence, and social exile, while their customers wrote laws by day and broke them by night. Head south to Charleston, where the post-war boom is turning it into a southern sin city. The Pink House on Chalmers Street is still the talk of the town, now catering to planters and merchants flush with rice and indigo money. But the dark undercurrent is slavery. Enslaved women forced into prostitution are a silent epidemic. Court records from 1788 mention an enslaved woman, Dinah, rented out by her owner for immoral purposes. No charges for the owner, just a warning to Dinah to behave. The absurdity: Charleston's elite built their mansions on the backs of enslaved. Labor, including sexual labor, then preached morality at Sunday service. Free women of color, like Marie Dubois, a real figure from 1789, navigated a razor's edge, running small brothels to gain independence but risking jail or worse if they crossed the wrong official. Survival meant playing a dangerous game. Bribe the right people, keep your head down, and pray the neighbors didn't snitch. The pain: no safety net, no rights, just a constant hustle in a society that saw you as less than human. Now, let's talk about the new nation's attempt to clean up. By the late 1780s, moral crusades are popping up, fueled by religious revivals and a desire to look civilized to Europe. In New York, the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge targets fallen women, offering reform through prayer and sewing lessons. Sounds sweet, right? Except it's a farce. Women who joined these programs often ended up back on the streets, sewing paid less than $1 a month, while a single client could net that in a night. The sarcasm, thanks do-gooders for saving souls while ignoring empty stomachs. In Philadelphia, 1789 sees the first Magdalene Asylum, a home for penitent prostitutes. The catch? You had to confess your sins publicly, endure sermons, and work grueling hours for no pay. Most women bolted within weeks, preferring the risks of the street to sanctimonious captivity. Comment, would you stick it out in the asylum or take your chances in the alleys? Tell me your escape plan below. The legal system's no help either. Vagrancy laws, like Massachusetts' 1787 statute, target night walkers and lewd persons, but enforcement's a circus. In 1785, Boston, a woman named Hannah Green was arrested 3 times in 1 year for prostitution, but released each time because a local tavern owner paid her fines. Why? She kept his customers happy. Corruption was the grease keeping the wheels turning. In Virginia, 1789 laws promised jail for disorderly women, but court records show judges often dismissed cases if the women promised to reform, or if their clients were influential. The dark irony: the same men writing these laws were often the ones sneaking into brothels after dark. A 1786 New York case mentions a judge caught in a raid, but excused because he was investigating. Sure, buddy, investigating the quality of the ale, no doubt. Let's zoom out to the frontier, where the rules are looser but the stakes are higher. In places like Kentucky or the Ohio Valley, taverns are the only social hubs, and prostitution is as common as whiskey. Women like Sally Morgan, a 1790 figure from court records, ran a house of entertainment near Fort Pitt. She was fined for immoral conduct, but kept operating because the local garrison relied on her. Survival out here meant dodging Indian raids, starvation, and vigilante justice, all while keeping the soldiers happy. The pain: isolation was crushing, and disease was a death sentence with no doctors for miles. The absurdity: these women were the backbone of frontier society, yet they'd be run out of town if the wrong preacher got wind. Humanizing this, meet Eliza Brown, a 24-year-old in 1788 Philadelphia. Her stories pieced from court and newspaper snippets. A former indentured servant, she turned to prostitution after her master dismissed her for refusing his advances. She worked Dock Street, saving enough to rent a room and hire 2 younger women, creating a mini brothel. In 1789, a raid landed her in jail, but she bribed her way out and was back in business by spring. By 1791, she was dead, likely from syphilis, though the papers called it fever. Her story's a microcosm: resilience, hustle, and a system that chewed her up. The sarcasm: congrats, America. You built a nation where Eliza's only crime was surviving. As we close this chapter, the new nation's still wrestling with its demons. Prostitution's not going anywhere. It's too baked into the economy, the war's legacy, and human nature. The 1790s loom, bringing urbanization and new waves of immigrants, which only fuel the trade. Part 4 will dive into how the early republic tries to regulate this problem while secretly loving it. If you're hooked, smash that like, subscribe for the final part, and comment, what's the most absurd hypocrisy you've spotted? Where are you watching from, and what's the vibe? Let's keep this history roast sizzling. Your engagement keeps the fire alive. Until next time, laugh at the past's absurdities to survive the present. Here we are, folks, at the grand finale of our gritty, sarcastic, and painfully real journey through the dark underbelly of colonial America's sex trade. Part 4, where the new nation tries to sweep its sins under the rug while tripping over them at every turn. It's the 1790s, and the United States is flexing its shiny new constitution, preaching liberty and pretending it's above the muck of its past. But guess what? Prostitution's not just hanging on, it's practically a founding institution, thriving in the shadows of every city and frontier outpost. From New York's seedy docks to Savannah's sultry streets, women are still dodging vagrancy laws, venereal diseases, and society's sanctimonious sneers to survive. This is a tale of absurd regulations, corrupt officials, and the raw resilience of those who kept the wheels turning in a nation too proud to admit it needed them. Let's dive into the final act. Comment below. What's the most infuriating thing about this era's hypocrisy you've learned so far? Let's roast the past one last time. The 1790s are a weird time. America's got a new government, a new capital, and a new obsession with looking respectable. The Federalists and Anti-Federalists are bickering over states' rights, while the average woman in the sex trade is just trying to avoid the stocks. Cities like New York and Philadelphia are booming, with immigrants pouring in, many of them young women with no money, no family, and no options. The sex trade? It's practically an economic engine, fueled by sailors, merchants, and even the occasional congressman looking for a night off from nation building. In New York, the Holy Ground's still the go-to spot, but now it's got competition from Canvas Town, a shanty town of burned-out buildings where sex work thrives amid the ashes. Madams like Sarah Newton, a 1793 figure from court records, run houses with military precision, bribing constables and keeping ledgers to blackmail high-profile clients. The absurdity? While John Adams is pontificating about virtue in Congress, Sarah's paying off his colleagues to keep her doors open. Survival meant mastering the art of leverage in a world that wanted you invisible. Philadelphia, the nation's capital until 1800, is a paradox of pomp and vice. The city's trying to be the face of American sophistication, but its alleys tell a different story. Market Street's taverns are buzzing with night walkers, as the 1797 vagrancy laws call them. Women like Rachel Carter, a 22-year-old in 1795 records, faced jail for lewd conduct after servicing a merchant in a backroom. Her punishment? 30 days in a workhouse sewing for free while her client walked free. The dark truth: the workhouse was less about reform and more about free labor for the city. Rachel's story is grim. She caught gonorrhea, lost her health, and vanished from records by 1798, likely dead. The pain? Women like her were trapped in a cycle. Low wages for respectable work like laundering, maybe 50 cents a month, versus $1 a night for sex work. The math wasn't hard, but the consequences were brutal. Disease, violence, and a society that blamed you for its own appetites. The sarcasm, "Oh, Philadelphia, city of brotherly love," unless you're a woman trying to eat. Comment: would you risk the workhouse or keep hustling in the alleys? Drop your survival plan below. Boston's still wrestling with its Puritan soul, but the 1790s see it loosening up, just a bit. Ann Street's now a full-blown red light district, with the brothels disguised as boarding houses. Women like Mary Ellis, 18, show up in 1796 court records, fined for entertaining sailors. Her defense? She was supporting her sick mother after her father died at sea. The judge let her off with a warning, but only because a local tavern owner vouched for her. The absurd twist: that same tavern owner was her biggest client, profiting from her work while playing the Good Samaritan. Boston's maritime economy depended on sailors, and sailors depended on women like Mary. So, the city cracked down with one hand, raids, fines, public shamings, while winking with the other. In 1794, a North End raid nabbed a dozen women, but let their clients, including a city alderman, slip away. The pain: these women, often teenagers, faced syphilis rates as high as 40%, per later studies, with no medical care beyond toxic mercury cures. The irony: the same society that preached salvation offered them none. Down in Charleston, the heat's on, literally and figuratively. The Pink House on Chalmers Street is a legend now, catering to planners flush with cash from cotton and rice. But the dark underbelly is uglier than ever. Enslaved women are still forced into sex work, their owners pocketing the profits. A 1795 case mentions an enslaved woman, Chloe, leased to a brothel by her master, a church deacon. No charges for him, just a fine for Chloe's immorality. Free women of color, like Sophie Laurent, a 1797 figure, ran their own houses, navigating a tightrope of bribes and threats to stay afloat. Sophie's story is a rare win. She saved enough to buy property by 1800, but only by playing the game better than her oppressors. The pain: for every Sophie, dozens of Chloes faced violence and exploitation with no escape. The absurdity: Charleston's elite built their holy city on the backs of women they condemned in Sunday sermons. Comment: what's the most outrageous double standard here? Drop it below and let's tear it apart. The new nation's obsession with cleaning up is in full swing by the late 1790s. Moral societies, like New York's Society for the Suppression of Vice, are popping up, targeting fallen women with reform programs that sound noble but feel like prisons. The Magdalene Society in Philadelphia, now a decade old, is still pushing its repent or suffer model: public confessions, endless sermons, and unpaid labor. Most women who entered left within months, preferring the street's dangers to the asylum's soul-crushing rules. The sarcasm: thanks reformers for saving women by breaking them. In 1799, New York tried licensing taverns to curb disorderly houses, but it backfired. Tavern owners just paid bigger bribes. A 1798 raid on a Canvas Town brothel caught 15 women but 0 clients because the constable forgot to arrest them. Corruption wasn't a bug, it was the system. The dark truth: the sex trade was too profitable, too essential to shut down. Merchants, landlords, and even politicians had their hands in the pot, skimming profits while preaching purity. The frontier's no kinder. In places like Cincinnati or Natchez, prostitution's as common as mud. Taverns along the Ohio River double as brothels, where women like Jane Reed, a 1796 figure, catered to fur traders and militiamen. Jane was fined for keeping a disorderly house, but kept going because the local fort's commander was her best customer. Survival out here meant dodging vigilantes who'd burn your cabin down if they felt offended. The pain: no doctors, no law, just you against a world that saw you as disposable. Disease was rampant. Venereal infections could kill you faster than a bear. The absurdity: these women were the social glue of frontier towns, yet they'd be chased out the moment a preacher arrived with a Bible and a grudge. Let's humanize this with Anna Thompson, a 21-year-old in 1797 New York. Her story stitched from court records and newspapers. An Irish immigrant, she landed in Canvas Town after her indenture ended, with no money and no family. She worked as a seamstress by day, a cover for nighttime sex work. By 1798, she was running a small brothel, employing 2 other women. A raid landed her in jail, but she bribed her way out and kept going until 1800, when she died, likely from tuberculosis, worsened by syphilis. Her story's a snapshot: cunning, grit, and a system that crushed her. The sarcasm: hats off America for building a nation where Anna's only sin was trying to live. As we wrap this saga, the 1800s are dawning, and the sex trade's only growing. Urbanization, immigration, and industrialization are about to make it explode, setting the stage for the 19th century's red light districts. The founding fathers' dream of a virtuous republic? A pipe dream, built on the backs of women like Anna, Rachel, and Chloe. The dark truth: prostitution wasn't a flaw in colonial America. It was a feature, propping up economies and egos while society looked the other way. The pain: these women's stories, full of hustle, heartbreak, and defiance, are buried under history's whitewashed narrative. The irony: a nation born on liberty owed its survival to those it enslaved, exploited, and ignored. This is the end of our journey, but the conversation's just starting. Smash that like, subscribe if you haven't, and comment. What's the most shocking thing you've learned from this series? Where are you watching from, and what's the vibe? Your engagement keeps this history alive. Let's honor these women by remembering their fight. Until next time, laugh at the past's absurdities, but never forget its pain. Imagine this: you're Pompey the Great, Rome's golden boy turned fugitive, rowing desperately toward the Egyptian shore in 48 BC, your empire crumbling like a stale loaf of bread. The Nile's waves lap mockingly as you spot figures on the beach, friends or foes. In seconds, a blade flashes and your head rolls into history's trash bin. Betrayal at its finest, folks. Welcome to the absurd tragedy of power's cruel punchline. Drop a comment. If you were Pompey, would you trust a teenage pharaoh's welcome party? Let's hear your survival instincts. Ah, the death of Pompey. It's not just a murder, it's a masterclass in historical irony, where the mighty fall harder than a gladiator's ego after a bad day in the arena. Picture the scene: the Mediterranean sun beating down like an unforgiving Roman tax collector, the air thick with salt and the stench of desperation. Pompey Magnus, the man who once strutted through Rome like he owned the place, because let's face it, he pretty much did, is now reduced to a bedraggled refugee, bobbing in a rickety fishing boat toward Egypt's golden sands. Oh, the absurdity. This is the guy who conquered pirates, annexed kingdoms, and made Julius Caesar look like a jealous sidekick for years. Yet here he is, banking on the hospitality of a 13-year-old boy king, Ptolemy the 13th, whose court is a viper's nest of scheming eunuchs and power-hungry advisors. Survival in ancient times? It's a joke, a brutal cosmic prank where ambition gets you to the top, only to shove you off a cliff into the Nile. Let's rewind a bit, because to appreciate the betrayal's sting, you need the full, sarcastic build-up. Pompey wasn't born with great tact to his name. He earned it through a mix of ruthless cunning, lucky breaks, and enough bloodshed to fill the Tiber twice over. Born in 106 BC to a nouveau-riche family. His dad was a consul, but the old money snobs still turned up their noses. Young Gnaeus Pompeius had to claw his way up. By 23, he's already raising private armies for Sulla, that dictator who made proscription lists the hot new way to eliminate rivals. Pompey? He thrives in the chaos, executing enemies with the enthusiasm of a kid at Saturnalia. Imperator at 24? Check. Crushing Sertorius in Spain? Done, with a side of glory stealing. The pain of survival back then. Imagine being a soldier under him, marching through Iberian hills, starving, fighting guerrillas who know every rock and ravine. One wrong step and you're skewered or left to rot with dysentery. But Pompey? He emerges smelling like roses, or at least like the laurels they crown him with. Fast forward to the 60s BC, and Pompey's hitting his stride. The pirates, those Mediterranean menaces who kidnapped young Caesar and demanded ransom, are his big break. Rome's grain supplies choked, senators are panicking, and who gets the gig to clear the seas? Pompey, with unprecedented powers. In 3 months, he sweeps them like dust under a villa rug. Absurd? Absolutely. Thousands of ships, tens of thousands of men, and he wraps it up faster than a toga party. But here's the dark twist. Many pirates surrender, get resettled as farmers. Survival for them means trading cutlasses for plows, only to face famine or rebellion later. Pompey's mercy? Pragmatic, sure, but it bites him when old grudges simmer. Comment below. Would you take Pompey's deal as a pirate, farm, or fight? What's your ancient career pivot? Then comes the East, where Pompey plays empire builder like a god with a new toy set. Mithridates of Pontus, the poison king who's dodged Rome for decades, finally meets his match. Pompey chases him across Asia Minor, annexing Syria, Judea, everything in between. Jerusalem falls in 63 BC. Imagine the siege. Ladders splintering, priests wailing as Roman boots stomp the temple grounds. The pain, Jewish rebels fighting for faith, only to be crucified or enslaved. Pompey peeks into the Holy of Holies, shrugs at the empty room, no arc, no drama, and moves on. Historical absurdity at its peak. The conqueror expecting divine fireworks gets zilch. Back home, he's Magnus, throwing triumphs that bankrupt the treasury. Elephants, gold, captives paraded like trophies. But survival's a grind. His soldiers, promised land, wait years while senators bicker. Many turn to crime or beggary, a bitter aftertaste to glory. Enter the first triumvirate, that unholy alliance of 60 BC. Pompey, Crassus the rich guy, and Caesar the upstart, 3 egos in a room, divvying Rome like a pie. Pompey marries Caesar's daughter Julia, sealing the deal with a wedding that screams power couple. It works for a bit. Pompey gets his veterans settled, Caesar gets Gaul to conquer. But oh, the irony. While Caesar's slaughtering tribes, 1 million dead, they say, Pompey's in Rome, playing politics like a fiddle. Clodius and Milo gangs turn streets into battlegrounds. Pompey gets sole consul in 52 BC to restore order. Absurd. The great general reduced to urban cop while his wife dies in childbirth, snapping the tie to Caesar. The pain of loss. Julia's death isn't just personal, it's the crack that dooms the Republic. Pompey remarries Crassus's daughter, politics over passion, while Caesar eyes the Rubicon. The 50s BC are a farce of escalating tensions. Caesar's winning in Gaul, stacking legions like poker chips, but senators fear his return. Pompey's their boy now, the defender of the Republic against Caesar's tyranny. Historical joke. Pompey, who once backed Caesar, now calls him a threat. Survival means flipping sides faster than a denarius in a bet. By 49 BC, it's on. Caesar crosses the Rubicon, alea iacta est, and civil war erupts. Pompey evacuates Rome in panic, leaving senators scrambling like rats from a sinking galley. The absurdity. Pompey, with eastern fleets and armies, runs from a guy with fewer troops. But Caesar's veterans are battle-hardened killers. Pompey's recruits, green as olives. Greece becomes the stage for this tragicomedy. Dear Hakium, 48 BC. Pompey breaks Caesar's siege, wounds him even. Victory tastes sweet, but hubris bites. Senators push for decisive battle. Pharsalus, flat Thessalian plains, perfect for cavalry, or so Pompey thinks. His nobles, those armchair generals, demand glory. Caesar, outnumbered, starving, still outmaneuvers him. The charge, Pompey's horse crushes Caesar's flank? Nope, Caesar's hidden cohort turns the tide. Panic spreads like wildfire. Pompey's camp, lush with silver and feasts, falls untouched. The pain, thousands slaughtered, survivors fleeing into hills, foraging berries while eagles circle. Pompey escapes on horseback, a broken man, his great title mocking him. Now, the flight. Pompey heads to Lesbos, grabs his wife Cornelia and son Sextus, then sails east. Options? Parthia, too risky. Those archers might sell him out. Africa? Loyal, but far. Egypt? Ah, young Ptolemy owes him. Pompey loaned cash to his dad Auletes, secured the throne. Surely gratitude awaits. The irony drips. Egypt, that decadent Ptolemaic mess, ruled by siblings Ptolemy the 13th and Cleopatra the 7th, locked in civil war. Ptolemy's advisors, Pothinus the eunuch, Achillas the general, Theodotus the rhetorician, smell opportunity. Caesar's coming, better gift him Pompey's head than risk war. September 28th, 48 BC, Pompey's boat nears Pelusium. A small craft approaches. Septimius, a Roman veteran who served under Pompey, now in Ptolemy's pay. With him, Achillas and Salvius. They wave welcome, but Cornelia senses doom from the ship. Pompey, ever the optimist, steps in, dignity intact, reading a speech in Greek. As the boat grounds, he rises. Septimius stabs from behind. Salvius and Achillas join the frenzy. Pompey pulls his toga over his head, classic Roman exit, and groans as blades bite. Head severed, body dumped naked on the shore. Absurd betrayal. His old soldier turning coat for Egyptian gold. The pain. Imagine the shock. Blood mixing with sand. Waves lapping indifferently. Philip, Pompey's freedman, finds the body, burns it on driftwood. A pauper's pyre for a conqueror. Head goes to Caesar, who weeps. Politics or genuine? He executes the killers later. But the nightmare lingers. Pompey's ghost haunts the Republic's fall. Comment. What's the biggest what if in Pompey's story? Win at Pharsalus? Tell me below. We've set the stage with Pompey's rise and fall, but part 2 dives into the Egyptian court's scheming vipers. If hooked, like, subscribe, comment your ancient betrayal tales. Where are you tuning from? Let's keep this historical horror show rolling. Alright, we're back, diving headfirst into the snake pit of ancient intrigue for part 2 of Pompey the Great's tragic, absurd, and downright infuriating end on the Egyptian shore. Last time, we left our boy Pompey bleeding out in a rickety boat, betrayed by his own former soldier under the orders of a teenage pharaoh's scheming court. The Nile's lapping at the blood-soaked sand, and the year's 48 BC, a perfect storm of ambition, betrayal, and historical irony that could make even a stoic cry. Picture this: a once mighty Roman general, now a headless footnote, thanks to a kid king and his backstabbing advisors. This chapter's all about the Egyptian court's deadly game, where survival's a twisted dance of flattery, a poison, and knives in the dark. Comment below. If you were stuck in Ptolemy's court, who'd you trust? Nobody's a safe bet, right? Let's roast this ancient mess together. Let's set the scene in Egypt, where the Ptolemaic dynasty makes Rome's political cesspool look like a philosophy seminar. It's 48 BC, and Egypt's a powder keg. Ptolemy the 13th, a 13-year-old with a crown too big for his head, is locked in a civil war with his sister wife queen, Cleopatra the 7th, who's all of 21 and already outsmarting everyone. Yes, sister wife. Ptolemies loved keeping it in the family, and if that's not absurd enough, their court's a circus of eunuchs, generals, and tutors who'd sell their own mothers for a shot at power. Pompey, fresh off his crushing defeat at Pharsalus, thinks Egypt's his safe haven because he helped Ptolemy's dad, Auletes, keep his throne years back. Oh, the irony. Pompey's expecting gratitude from a court that eats loyalty for breakfast and spits out betrayal by lunch. Survival here? It's like playing chess with scorpions. Every move stings. Rewind a bit to understand this mess. The Ptolemies are Greek Macedonian leftovers from Alexander the Great's empire, a ruling Egypt like pharaohs, but with a Hellenic flair. Think togas meet sphinxes. By 48 BC, Egypt's rich from grain exports, but crumbling under debt to Rome and internal squabbles. Auletes, Ptolemy XIII's dad, was a flute-playing disaster who bribed Romans like Pompey to stay in power, racking up debts that'd make Crassus blush. When he died in 51 BC, he left the throne to Ptolemy XIII and Cleopatra, co-rulers in a marriage that's more political than passionate. Cleopatra, sharp as a gladius, wants to rule solo. Ptolemy's advisors, Pothinus the eunuch, Achillas the general, and Theodotus the rhetorician, want her gone so they can puppet the boy king. The pain of survival. Imagine Cleopatra, dodging assassination plots at 21, while her little brother's cronies schemed to drown her in the Nile. Absurd? You bet. Ruling the richest land in the Mediterranean, yet fighting over who gets to wear the pharaoh hat. Enter Pompey, stage left, rowing toward Pelusium, Egypt's eastern frontier, where Ptolemy's camped with his army, facing off against Cleopatra's forces. Pompey's not just a fugitive, he's a walking liability. Caesar's hot on his tail, fresh from Pharsalus, with legions that make grown men wet their tunics. Pompey's got a ship, his wife Cornelia, his son Sextus, and a handful of loyalists, hardly an army. His plan? Beg asylum from Ptolemy, banking on old favors. But here's the dark twist. Ptolemy's court isn't rolling out the red carpet, they're sharpening knives. Pothinus, the brains of the operation, smells a chance to cozy up to Caesar. Why shelter a loser when you can gift his head to the winner? Theodotus, ever the wordsmith, reportedly quips, "Dead men don't bite." Achillas, the muscle, nods along. The absurdity, these three, a castrated bureaucrat, a slick-talking tutor, and a grizzled general, decide the fate of Rome's greatest general over what was probably a tense lunch. Let's zoom in on Pelusium, September 28, 48 BC. The Nile Delta is a swampy maze, the air thick with mosquitoes and tension. Pompey's ship anchors offshore, his crew scanning the beach for a welcome. A small boat approaches, carrying Septimius, a Roman veteran who once fought under Pompey in his glory days. With him are Achillas and Salvius, Ptolemy's men, waving like old pals. Cornelia, watching from the deck, smells a rat, her guts screaming this is a trap. But Pompey, ever the optimist, or maybe just exhausted, decides to trust them. He's 58, battle-worn, and out of options. The pain. Imagine his heart sinking as he steps into that boat, clutching a speech in Greek, hoping to charm a boy king who's barely hit puberty. Survival's a cruel game when your allies are your executioners. The betrayal's swift and brutal. As the boat scrapes the shore, Septimius strikes first, stabbing Pompey in the back, poetic for a man betrayed by his past. Achillas and Salvius pile on, blades flashing. Pompey, with a final shred of dignity, pulls his toga over his face, a Roman's way of saying, "I'm out." He groans, falls, and his head's hacked off before the waves can wash away the blood. The absurdity peaks. Septimius, who once saluted Pompey as imperator, now holds his severed head like a trophy. The body's left naked on the sand, a conqueror reduced to carrion. Philip, Pompey's loyal freedman, later creeps ashore, gathers driftwood, and burns the body, a pauper's funeral for a man who paraded elephants in Rome. The head? Sent to Caesar, who in a rare moment of theater, weeps crocodile tears before executing the killers. Comment: if you were Philip, would you risk the shore to honor Pompey, or sail away? Drop your call below. Now, let's unpack the Egyptian court's motives, because this is where the sarcasm drips like Nile mud. Pothinus and company aren't just killing Pompey for kicks, it's cold calculus. Egypt's broke, caught between Rome's debt collectors and a civil war. Cleopatra's out there, raising an army, charming allies with her wit and, let's be honest, her charisma. Ptolemy's advisors know Caesar's the real power now, and a dead Pompey's their golden ticket to his favor. The irony? They misread Caesar like a bad papyrus scroll. When they present Pompey's head, Caesar's not grateful. He's furious. Why? Partly politics. He wanted Pompey alive to parade in Rome, cementing his victory. Partly personal. Pompey was his rival, sure, but also his daughter's husband once. The pain. Caesar's tears might be fake, but the executioner's deaths are real. Pothinus and Achillas are dead within months, caught in Cleopatra's counterstroke. Theodotus flees, only to be crucified years later. Survival in Egypt, a fleeting dream. Cleopatra's role in this is murky, and that's the fun part. She's not at Pelusium, exiled, plotting her comeback, but her shadow looms. Some ancient sources hint she might have nudged Ptolemy's court to ditch Pompey, knowing it had pushed Caesar her way. By late 48 BC, she's sneaking into Alexandria, rolled in a rug, or laundry sack, depending on the tale, to charm Caesar. The absurdity, while Pompey's head rolls, Cleopatra's playing 4D chess, turning Caesar into her lover and ally. The pain. Imagine being a common Egyptian, caught between these power plays, your grain fields trampled by armies, your taxes feeding royal schemes. Survival meant dodging conscription, famine, and the whims of a court that cared more about Rome than its own people. The broader picture's grim. Pompey's death isn't just a personal tragedy, it's the Republic's death knell. With him gone, Caesar faces no equal, paving the way for dictatorship. The Senate's a husk, the old Roman virtues, honor, loyalty, buried under ambition's rubble. The irony, Pompey, who fought to save the Republic, dies a refugee, betrayed by allies he helped create. Egypt's gamble fails too. Caesar backs Cleopatra. Ptolemy drowns in the Nile, and Egypt becomes Rome's plaything. Comment: what's the biggest what if here? Pompey surviving to fight another day. Tell me below. We've peeled back the Egyptian court schemes, but part 3 dives into Caesar's reaction and the fallout shaking Rome as in Egypt. If you're hooked, smash that like, subscribe for more, and comment, where are you tuning in from, and what's the most absurd betrayal you've heard so far? Let's keep this historical nightmare alive. Alright, we're back for part 3 of our wild, sarcastic plunge into the bloody betrayal of Pompey the Great on Egypt's treacherous shores. Picture this. It's late 48 BC, and Pompey's head is rolling, literally, presented to Julius Caesar like a grisly gift basket from Ptolemy XIII's scheming court. The Nile's still whispering its indifference, and the Roman Republic's teetering on the edge of oblivion. This chapter's all about Caesar's reaction, the fallout in Egypt, and the ripple effects that turn Rome's dreams of glory into a nightmare of ambition. It's a tale of crocodile tears, power plays, and the absurd pain of surviving a world where loyalty's cheaper than a loaf of Egyptian bread. Comment below. If you were Caesar, would you weep for Pompey or laugh at the irony? Let's keep roasting this historical circus. Caesar's ship glides into Alexandria's harbor, October 48 BC, the air heavy with salt and the stench of Ptolemy's desperation. He's chasing Pompey, his old rival, hoping to end this civil war with a grand Roman showdown, maybe a parade, maybe a public surrender to cement his legend. Instead, he gets a severed head, handed over by Theodotus, that slick-talking tutor who thought, hey, why not win Caesar's favor with a decapitation? The scene's pure theater. Caesar, flanked by his battle-hardened centurions, stares at Pompey's face. Once his ally, his daughter's husband, now a waxy trophy. Ancient sources like Plutarch say Caesar weeps, clutching the head, mourning his friend. Sarcasm alert. Oh please, Julius, save the crocodile tears for the Senate. Was it grief? Maybe a sliver. Pompey was family once. But mostly it's politics. A live Pompey could have been paraded in Rome, humiliated, pardoned, or executed to show Caesar's magnanimity. A dead Pompey, just a PR headache. The pain. Imagine Caesar's soldiers, expecting a final battle, now watching their general play mourner while plotting his next move. Survival in Rome's game means turning every loss into a win, even if it's just for show. The absurdity peaks when Caesar orders the executioners punished. Pothinus, the eunuch mastermind, and Achillas, the general who swung the blade, are marked for death. Theodotus, the quippy tutor, bolts. Smart move, but he's crucified years later in Asia. Caesar's not just avenging Pompey, he's signaling to Egypt, I'm the boss now. But here's the dark twist. Ptolemy XIII, the boy king, is still on the throne, a puppet of his advisors' bad ideas. His court thought killing Pompey would make Caesar their BFF. Instead, it's a diplomatic faceplant. Egypt's already a mess. Civil war with Cleopatra, grain shortages, Roman debts piling up like bodies after a legion's march. The irony, Ptolemy's crew bet on the wrong horse, and now Caesar's in Alexandria, eyeing their throne like a hawk circling a wounded gazelle. Comment: if you were in Ptolemy's court, would you stick with the Kid King or jump ship to Cleopatra? Drop your strategy below. Speaking of Cleopatra, let's talk about the queen stealing the show. She's not in Pelusium when Pompey's killed, exiled, raising an army, but she's the shadow over every move. By October, she's back, sneaking into Alexandria in that famous rug, or a laundry sack, per some sources. Picture it, a 21-year-old queen rolled up like contraband, unrolling at Caesar's feet with a smile that says, "Pick me, I'm your winning bet." The absurdity, while Ptolemy's advisors are fumbling with Pompey's head, Cleopatra's seducing Rome's greatest general. Is it love? Nah, power. She needs Caesar's legions to crush her brother. He needs Egypt's grain to feed Rome. Their fling's a masterclass in survival. Cleopatra gambles her charm, Caesar his reputation. The pain. Imagine being an Egyptian farmer, your fields trampled by Ptolemy's troops, your taxes funding this royal soap opera. Survival means dodging conscription while praying the Nile doesn't flood your livelihood. The fallout in Egypt is chaos wrapped in a farce. Caesar, now shacked up with Cleopatra in Alexandria's palace, declares himself arbiter of the Ptolemaic feud. He summons Ptolemy the 13th and demands a truce with his sister. Ptolemy, egged on by Pothinus, throws a tantrum. Imagine a 13-year-old telling Caesar, "You're not my dad." By early 47 BC, things escalate. Pothinus plots to kill Caesar, but the Roman spies are sharper. Pothinus is executed, Achilles leads an army against Alexandria, and the city becomes a war zone. The Battle of the Nile, 47 BC, is a brutal affair. Caesar's outnumbered, but his veterans are worth 10 of Ptolemy's conscripts. The boy king flees, drowns in the Nile, probably weighed down by his oversized ego and a heavy crown. Cleopatra wins, installed as queen with her younger brother Ptolemy the 14th, another sibling husband because Ptolemy's. The dark truth: Egypt's now Rome's client state, its independence as dead as Pompey. Survival for Cleopatra means playing Caesar's game, bearing his son Caesarion, and hoping Rome doesn't swallow her whole. Back in Rome, Pompey's death sends shockwaves. The Senate, already a toothless relic, is split. Pompey's supporters mourn their champion, while Caesar's allies cheer, but the Republic's on life support. Pompey was the last big check on Caesar's ambition. Crassus died in Parthia. Cato's a stubborn idealist. Cicero's just yelling into the void. The irony: Pompey fought to save the Republic, but his death hands Caesar the keys to dictatorship. Senators whisper of tyranny, but they're too busy bickering to act. The pain: imagine being a Roman pleb, cheering Pompey's triumphs years ago, now watching his allies flee to Africa or Spain, raising armies for a lost cause. Survival means picking sides in a civil war where the winner's already clear. Caesar's legions don't lose. Pompey's family feels the sting deepest. Cornelia, his widow, and son Sextus escape to Lesbos, then Africa, where Pompey's loyalists rally. Sextus, barely 20, becomes a pirate king of sorts, harassing Caesar's fleets. The absurdity: Pompey's son, once heir to a Roman dynasty, now a sea bandit, fighting a war his father lost. Cornelia remarries, fades from history, her grief a private wound in a public collapse. The pain: imagine her watching Pompey step into that boat, knowing it's a trap, powerless to stop it. Survival for her means swallowing loss and sailing into exile, a widow of a republic that's dying too. The broader Mediterranean feels the quake. In Judea, where Pompey once stormed Jerusalem, locals hear of his death with mixed feelings. Some cheer, remembering his temple violation. Others shrug, used to Roman overlords swapping faces. In Asia Minor, Mithridates' old allies toast Pompey's end, but it's hollow. Caesar's coming for them next. The irony: Pompey's eastern conquests made Rome's empire, but his death ensures it'll be Caesar's, not a republic's. Survival for these provinces means bending the knee to a new master. paying taxes to fund Rome's endless wars. Let's humanize this with Philip, Pompey's freedman, who risked his life to burn his master's body on Pelusium's shore. Picture him, a former slave, creeping past Egyptian guards, gathering driftwood under moonlight, the stench of death heavy. He builds a pyre, lights it, and watches flames consume the man who gave him freedom. The pain, loyalty in a world that rewards betrayal. The absurdity of freedmen's the only one honoring Rome's greatest general, while senators and kings play power games. Philip's fate's unknown. Likely he sailed off with Cornelia, a ghost in history's margins. Comment: if you were Philip, would you burn the body or run? Share your gutsy move below. As we wrap this part, Egypt's under Cleopatra's sway, Caesar's plotting his Roman takeover, and Pompey's legacy is ashes on a beach. The Republic's fading, and the Mediterranean's a chessboard for emperors to be. Part 4 will dive into the long shadow of Pompey's death, how it shapes Rome's fall, Cleopatra's gamble, and the birth of an empire. If you're hooked, smash that like, subscribe for the finale, and comment, what's the most shocking twist in this saga so far? Where are you tuning in from, and what's the vibe? Let's keep this historical bloodbath rolling. Here we are, folks, at the final act of our bloody, sarcastic saga of Pompey, the great's betrayal and murder on Egypt's deceitful shores. It's 48 BC, and Pompey's head is long gone, his ashes scattered on a Pelusium beach, while Julius Caesar and Cleopatra rewrite the Mediterranean's future. The Roman Republic's gasping its last breaths, and the ripples of Pompey's death are shaking Rome, Egypt, and beyond like an earthquake in a house of cards. This is a tale of shattered dreams, imperial ambitions, and the absurd pain of surviving a world where power trumps loyalty every time. From Caesar's dictatorship to Cleopatra's high-stakes gamble, we're diving into the long shadow of Pompey's fall, a legacy of ashes that births an empire. Comment below. What's the most gut-wrenching betrayal in this story for you? Let's roast this ancient tragedy one last time. Caesar's in Alexandria, late 48 BC, shacked up with Cleopatra in a palace that makes Rome's villas look like shacks. He's just crushed Ptolemy XIII's forces at the Battle of the Nile, watched the boy king drown, and installed Cleopatra as Egypt's queen with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, as a figurehead husband. Because Ptolemy's, am I right? The irony's thick. Pompey's death, meant to win Caesar's favor, instead handed Cleopatra the throne and Caesar a lover who's as cunning as he is. Their son, Caesarion, born in 47 BC, is a walking middle finger to Rome's old guard, a half-Egyptian heir to a republic that's allergic to kings. The pain. Imagine being a Roman senator, hearing Caesar's cozying up to a foreign queen, while Pompey's allies, like Cato, plot resistance in Africa. Survival means navigating a Rome where republic is just a word and Caesar's legions are the law. Back in Rome, Pompey's death is a death knell for the republic. The Senate's a circus of squabbling aristocrats too spineless to stop Caesar's rise. Pompey was their last big champion, the guy who balanced Caesar's ambition with his own ego. Now, Cato's in Utica, rallying Pompey's loyalists, but it's a lost cause. The Battle of Thapsus, 46 BC, sees Caesar annihilate them. Cato, ever the stoic, falls on his sword rather than live under Caesar's thumb. Noble, sure, but also absurdly futile. The pain. Imagine being a Roman pleb, once cheering Pompey's triumphs, now watching Caesar parade as victor while your taxes fund his wars. Survival means keeping your head down, praying you're not on the next prescription list. The sarcasm, congrats Rome. You traded a republic for a dictator who throws better parties. Cleopatra is playing the long game, and it's a masterclass in survival. She follows Caesar to Rome in 46 BC, living in his villa across the Tiber, flaunting her status as his mistress. Romans whisper Cleopatra's a seductress, a threat to their virtues. The irony, these are the same Romans who cheered Pompey's eastern conquests, which made Egypt Rome's client state. Cleopatra's not just surviving, she's thriving, using Caesar's power to secure Egypt's grain exports and her throne. But the pain's real. She's a queen in a foreign city, surrounded by enemies who'd rather see her dead than crowned. Her son Caesarion's a bargaining chip, but also a target. Roman nobles hate the idea of an Egyptian heir. Comment: if you were Cleopatra, would you risk Rome's viper pit or stay safe in Alexandria? Drop your power, move below. The Mediterranean's a chessboard, and Pompey's death moved all the pieces. In Spain, Pompey's sons, Gnaeus and Sextus, keep the fight alive, raising armies against Caesar. The Battle of Munda, 45 BC, is a bloodbath. Caesar wins, Gnaeus dies, but Sextus escapes, turning pirate to harass Rome's fleets. The absurdity, Pompey's legacy, once glittering triumphs, is now his son dodging galleys in the Balearics. In Judea, Pompey's conquests left a bitter taste. His temple intrusion in 63 BC still stings, and locals see his death as divine justice. But Caesar's no better. He tightens Rome's grip, taxing provinces to fund his monuments. The pain. Imagine being a Judean merchant, your profits bled dry by Roman collectors, your faith mocked by conquerors who change names but not tactics. Survival means paying up and praying for a miracle. Rome sliding into empire, and Pompey's ghost haunts every step. By 44 BC, Caesar's dictator for life, wearing purple robes like a king, ironic for a guy who fought Pompey to save the Republic. The Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BC, see him stabbed 23 times by senators, including Brutus and Cassius, who think they're avenging the Republic. Spoiler, they're not. The Republic's dead, and Pompey's murder was the first nail in its coffin. The absurdity. Brutus, once Pompey's ally, kills Caesar to restore a system already gone. The pain. Rome plunges into another civil war, with Octavian, Caesar's heir, and Mark Antony facing off against the assassins. Survival for Romans means dodging conscription, riots, and prescriptions that make Sulla's look tame. Cleopatra's story keeps twisting. After Caesar's death, she bolts back to Egypt, poisons Ptolemy 14, allegedly Ptolemy's gonna Ptolemy, and rules with Caesarion. She hooks up with Mark Antony by 41 BC, trading Egypt's wealth for his protection. The irony. Antony, who fought under Caesar against Pompey, now mirrors Pompey's eastern ambitions, dreaming of empires while Octavian plots in Rome. Cleopatra's survival is a tightrope, balancing Antony's ego, Rome's greed, and Egypt's independence. The pain. Her people starve while she sends grain to Rome. Her son's life hangs by a thread as Octavian's star rises. By 31 BC, Actium's looming, a naval clash that'll end her and Antony. Pompey's death set this domino chain. No Pompey, no Caesar's dictatorship, no Octavian's empire. Let's humanize this with Cornelia, Pompey's widow. After his murder, she flees to Lesbos, then Africa, watching her son Sextus fight a losing war. Picture her, a Roman matron once hosting senators, now in exile, her world reduced to whispers of her husband's betrayal. She remarries, fades from records, but her pain lingers, losing Pompey, her home, her republic. The absurdity, a woman of Rome's elite, reduced to a footnote while Caesar's statues rise. Survival for her meant silence, a bitter pill for someone who saw it all crumble. Comment: if you were Cornelia, would you fight with Sextus or retire quietly? Share your choice below. The broader world feels Pompey's absence. In Asia Minor, old enemies like Pharnaces of Pontus exploit Rome's chaos, only to be crushed by Caesar at Zela, Veni, Vidi, Vici. The irony, Pompey's conquests stabilize these regions, his death destabilizes them. Provinces pay the price, taxed to death for Roman wars. The pain. Imagine a Syrian farmer, your crops requisitioned, your sons drafted while Roman generals play king. Survival means bowing to whichever eagle flies overhead. As we close, Pompey's death isn't just a murder, it's the Republic's obituary. Caesar's dictatorship, Octavian's empire, Cleopatra's fall, all trace back to that bloody Egyptian shore. The sarcasm thanks Ptolemy's court for kickstarting an empire by killing the guy who built it. The dark truth, Pompey's ambition, loyalty, and trust were his downfall, betrayed by a world he shaped. His legacy? A Rome that traded liberty for power, built on the ashes of men like him and the women, like Cornelia and Cleopatra, who fought to survive its collapse. This saga's done, but the conversation's alive. Smash that like, subscribe if you haven't, and comment, what's the most shocking ripple from Pompey's death? Where are you tuning in from, and what's the vibe? Let's honor these ancient survivors by keeping their story burning. Until next time, Laugh at the past's absurdities, but never forget its pain. Imagine this. A rotund man in his 60s, sprawled across a massive four-poster bed, silk pajamas rumpled, a half-smoked cigar clenched between his teeth, barking orders at terrified secretaries while the fate of the world hangs in the balance. Bombs are falling on London, Hitler's armies are rampaging across Europe, and here's Winston Churchill, Britain's bulldog prime minister, refusing to get out of bed until noon. Why? Because in the chaotic nightmare of history, sometimes the only way to save civilization is to treat your mattress like a war room. Buckle up, folks. This is the story of why Churchill worked from bed half the day, a tale dripping with irony, absurdity, and the raw pain of surviving a world gone mad. And hey, if you've ever hit snooze during a crisis, drop a comment below. What's your wildest work from bed story? Let's see if it tops leading a nation through hell. Let's rewind the clock to the early 20th century, where life wasn't just hard. It was a brutal, soul-crushing grind that makes your Monday morning Zoom call look like a spa day. Picture Victorian England, still clinging to its empire like a drunk uncle at a wedding. But underneath the pomp and circumstance, it's all typhoid, child labor, and horse manure piled higher than Big Ben. Into this mess waddles baby Winston, born in 1874 at Blenheim Palace. Not in a hospital like some peasant, but in a coat room during a ball because his American mother, Jenny, couldn't be bothered to pause the party for labor pains. Oh, the glamour. From day one, young Winston learns that life is absurd. You enter the world amid champagne flutes and waltzing aristocrats, only to face a childhood of neglect that would make Oliver Twist blush. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, a rising political star with a mustache that could conquer India on its own, barely acknowledges the kid. Randolph's got syphilis eating his brain. Thanks, Victorian morals. And he treats Winston like a disappointing investment. You're ugly, stupid, and destined for failure, he basically tells the boy in letters that drip with paternal warmth. Mom? She's off gallivanting with lovers, leaving Winston to nannies who probably wish they'd chosen coal mining instead. School? Harrow, where bullying is the curriculum, and Winston's dyslexia makes him the class dunce. He stutters, he fails exams, and the other boys mock him mercilessly. Survival in this era means enduring beatings, rote memorization of Latin verbs, and meals that taste like boiled regret. No therapy, no ADHD meds, just suck it up, buttercup, or die of cholera. But here's the ironic twist. This rejected runt turns his pain into fuel. He escapes into books, devouring history like it's the only thing keeping him from the abyss. Tales of Marlborough ancestors battling across Europe, Napoleon's ego trips, the absurd heroism of forgotten wars. Winston dreams of glory, but reality bites hard. He flunks the Sandhurst entrance exam twice, before scraping in. Military life? A parade of near-death experiences. In Cuba, dodging bullets while reporting on the rebellion, puffing cigars that become his lifelong crutch. In India, playing polo with officers who view natives as target practice. Then Sudan, where he charges into the Battle of Omdurman on horseback, lancing fuzzy-wuzzies in a colonial farce that leaves thousands dead for queen and country. Absurd? You bet. Churchill kills men up close, feels the hot spray of blood, and writes about it like it's a jolly adventure novel. The pain? Limbs hacked off, dysentery ripping through camps, friends rotting in the sand, history's nightmare, empire built on bones justified with stiff upper lips. Fast forward to the Boer War, 1899. Winston, now a war correspondent with political ambitions, gets captured faster than you can say imperial overreach. Locked in a Pretoria prison, he plots escape like a bad spy thriller. Scales walls, hides in rat-infested mines, hitches rides on trains while Boers hunt him like a fox. Success. He becomes a hero back home, parlaying the tale into a parliamentary seat. But, oh, the irony. This escape artist spends his career trapped in the gilded cage of British politics, where backstabbing makes battlefield bayonets look tame. He switches parties, from conservative to liberal, like changing socks, earning the nickname Turncoat in Enemies Galore. As First Lord of the Admiralty, he pushes for naval reforms, but World War I explodes in 1914, turning Europe into a meat grinder. Ah, the Great War, the ultimate historical absurdity. Millions march to trenches expecting glory, get mustard gas and machine guns instead. Churchill champions the Dardanelles campaign, a brilliant idea on paper: force the Straits, knock Turkey out, relieve Russia. Reality? A clusterfuck of epic proportions. Ships sink in minefields, troops bogged down on Gallipoli beaches, Anzacs slaughtered in pointless assaults. Over 200,000 casualties, and Churchill takes the blame. Resigns in disgrace, reputation in tatters. The pain? He sinks into depression, what he calls his black dog, pacing Checker's estate, painting gloomy landscapes to ward off suicidal thoughts. Survival means reinventing yourself amid the ruins. He joins the front lines in France, commanding a battalion in mud-soaked hellholes, where rats feast on corpses and shells whistle like death's lullaby. Absurd. The architect of disaster now wallowing in it, dodging snipers while penning defiant letters home. Post-war, Churchill bounces back, but the 1920s are no picnic. As Chancellor of the Exchequer, he returns Britain to the gold standard, a move that tanks the economy, sparks strikes, and leaves miners starving in the streets. Irony alert. The man who'll save Britain from Nazis helps plunge it into depression. Personal life? A whirlwind of excess to numb the pain. He marries Clementine in 1908, a union of love amid chaos, but their home buzzes with dysfunction. Kids arrive: Diana, Randolph, Sarah, Marigold, who dies tragically young from sepsis because antibiotics. What are those? And Winston's parenting style is absentee autocrat. He gambles fortunes at casinos, drinks like a fish, champagne for breakfast, scotch for lunch, and writes books to pay off debts. His routine? Erratic, fueled by adrenaline and denial. Enter the 1930s, the wilderness years. Churchill warns of Hitler's rise while Parliament yawns. "Rearm, prepare," he thunders, but they call him warmonger. Has been. He retreats to Chartwell, his Kent manor, burying himself in history tomes and bricklaying. Yes, he builds walls by hand, perhaps metaphorically fortifying against the coming storm. The absurdity. As Europe arms for apocalypse, Churchill feeds black swans, paints sunsets, and dictates multi-volume histories from his study. But pain lurks, financial ruin looms. His son Randolph spirals into alcoholism, and Clementine battles her own demons. Survival? Sheer stubbornness. He naps religiously, siestas that recharge his bulldog spirit, hinting at the bedbound habits to come. Then, boom, 1939, war erupts. Poland falls. Chamberlain dithers with peace in our time nonsense. May 1940. Norway debacle topples the government, and Churchill, at 65, becomes PM. The ultimate irony, the outcast now leads a nation on the brink. France collapses. Dunkirk miracle saves the army, but leaves Britain naked against invasion. Luftwaffe bombs rain down, U-boats starve the island. And how does Churchill fight? From bed, half the day. Why? Let's unpack this glorious madness. First, his health is a wreck. Decades of cigars, booze, and stress have turned his body into a battlefield. Heart flutters, indigestion that feels like bayonet stabs, weight ballooning to 250 pounds on a 5'6" frame. Doctors warn of strokes, but he scoffs. Bed becomes sanctuary, a place to conserve energy in a world demanding 18-hour days. He wakes around 7:30 a.m., not to dress. Oh no. Breakfast in bed, poached eggs, bacon, toast, jam, coffee laced with brandy. Then, newspapers scattered like intel reports. He scans headlines while puffing a Romeo y Julieta. Secretaries arrive, stenographers perched awkwardly as he dictates speeches naked under sheets. Yes, naked, because why not add humiliation to the war effort? Absurd? Picture it. Bombs shaking London, air raid sirens wailing, and Churchill, propped on pillows, growling memos on strategy. Action this day, stamps on urgent papers. Admirals, generals troop in for bedside briefings, standing at attention while the PM lounges like a Roman emperor. The pain? Sleepless nights haunted by casualties, thousands dead in convoys, cities ablaze. He weeps privately over losses, but publicly, defiance. We shall fight on the beaches, drafted from that very bed, words that rally a nation teetering on despair. But why bed specifically? It's a rebellion against convention, a sarcastic thumb at the stiff bureaucracy that nearly lost the war. Victorian upbringing drilled punctuality, but Churchill flips it. Efficiency through eccentricity. Dictating saves time. No scribbling with arthritic hands. Multitasking master. He reads dispatches, eats lunch, roast beef, pudding, port, plans invasions, all horizontal. Irony. In an era of rigid hierarchies, the leader rules from repose, proving power isn't in posture but in persistence. Dive deeper into the daily grind. By noon, he baths, scalding hot with toy ducks for company, then dresses in siren suits, zip-up overalls for quick shelter dashes. Afternoons, cabinet meetings, parliament harangues, rooftop vigils watching dogfights. Evenings, dinners with allies, whiskey-fueled strategy sessions till 2 a.m. Sleep, 4 hours, plus naps. The bed routine sustains him through blitzes that kill 40,000 civilians, rationing that starves bellies, betrayals like Pearl Harbor pulling America in late. Historical absurdity peaks in 1941. Churchill sails to meet Roosevelt aboard HMS Prince of Wales, dictating from his cabin bunk amid Atlantic gales. They forge the Atlantic Charter, blueprint for the UN, while U-boats lurk. Pain of survival. Shipmates recall his insomnia. Pacing decks in dressing gown, cigar glowing like a beacon. Back home, bed becomes command center for overlord planning, but not without cost. Strokes in 1941 and 1943, hidden from public. Pneumonia in Carthage, where he dictates wills from sickbed, joking about meeting God in pajamas. Sarcastic immersion. Imagine being his secretary. Kay Summersby or whoever, notepad ready as he rants on Vichy France while scratching places. The nightmare. Typewriters clacking over air raid warnings, tea spilled on secrets. Yet, this chaos works. Churchill's output? Volumes of memos, speeches that echo eternity. Never was so much owed by so many to so few. Bed-born brilliance. But let's not romanticize. The pain is real. Empire crumbling, India starving under famine he dismisses. Bengal's millions dead while he prioritizes war supplies. Absurd imperialism, saving democracy by denying it to colonies. His racism quips about beastly natives, history's dark underbelly. Survival means moral compromises that haunt. As war turns, bed habit persists. Tehran Conference, 1943. Stalin mocks his lateness, but Churchill, fresh from siesta, outmaneuvers the dictator. Yalta, 1945. Frail, he negotiates Europe's fate from hotel beds, seeding Cold War. Victory in Europe? He announces from Downing Street, but PrEP? Bedside. Then election shock. Booted out in 1945, ungrateful voters choosing labor. Irony, savior rejected, retreating to Chartwell for more bedbound writing. Post-war, the habit sticks. Opposition leader, he pens war memoirs. 6 volumes, Nobel Prize winning, from pillows. Second term as PM in 1951. Bed commands continue, baffling staff. Retirement in 1955, strokes mounting. He lingers till 1965. Bed his final fortress. So why bed half the day? It's defiance against a world that tried to break him, from neglectful parents to Nazi bombs. Absurd efficiency in chaos, ironic luxury amid austerity, painful adaptation to frailty. History's nightmare. Leaders are human, flawed, surviving by quirks that save nations. What do you think? Could you lead from bed? Comment below with your take, and stay tuned for part 2, where we dive into the wilder scandals. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more historical madness. Alright, strap in for round 2 of Winston Churchill's bedbound saga, where the absurdity of history cranks up to 11, the irony stings like a wasp in your teacup, and the pain of survival makes you wonder how anyone got through the 20th century without losing their mind. If you thought part 1 was a wild ride, Churchill dictating war plans in his birthday suit, dodging bombs while munching bacon, then brace yourself. This chapter dives into the darker, weirder corners of his life, where personal scandals, political betrayals, and the sheer chaos of leading a nation from a mattress collide in a glorious mess. Missed part 1? Go back and watch it, because this train's already barreling through the madness. And here's your hook. Ever wonder how a cigar-chomping, whiskey-guzzling, bed-loving bulldog kept Britain afloat while his own life was a soap opera of epic proportions? Stick around, because this is Churchill Unfiltered, warts, pajamas, and all. Drop a comment. What's the most unhinged thing you've done to get through a crisis? Let's see if it matches Winston's antics. We left off with Churchill becoming Prime Minister in May 1940, the ultimate underdog clawing his way from political exile to the hot seat, just as Hitler's blitzkrieg steamrolls Europe. France is kaput, Britain's army is limping back from Dunkirk, and the Luftwaffe is about to turn London into a piñata. Most leaders would be chained to a desk, sweating over maps, but Churchill? He sprawled in bed till noon, silk sheets tangled, a tray of half-eaten kippers balanced on his belly, barking orders like a general who forgot where he parked his uniform. Why? Because in the nightmare of history, normalcy is for suckers. Bed is his bunker, his rebellion against a world that's been trying to bury him since birth. But let's zoom out and dig into the juicy bits, the scandals, the betrayals, the absurdities that make this bed obsession more than just a quirk. First, let's talk about Winston's personal life, because if you think war was messy, his family drama could fuel a Netflix series for a decade. Married to Clementine Hosier since 1908, he's got a love story that sounds romantic, until you peek behind the curtain. Clementine is his rock, his confidant, the one person who can tell him to shut up without getting fired. But their marriage? A roller coaster of neglect, shouting matches, and long stretches where they barely see each other. She's stuck managing their 5 kids, Diana, Randolph, Sarah, Marigold, who died at 2, a gut punch Winston never quite recovers from, and Mary, while he's off chasing glory or drowning in debt. Clementine's no saint either. She flirts with disaster during a 1930s cruise, cozying up to a charming nobody named Terrence Phillip, leaving Winston paranoid she might bolt. Spoiler, she doesn't, but the tension's thick enough to choke on. Imagine surviving that kind of heartbreak while warning the world about Nazis. Pain? Oh, it's personal. The kids aren't exactly poster children for stability either. Randolph, the heir apparent, is a walking catastrophe. Arrogant, alcoholic, gambling away fortunes faster than his dad. He crashes through marriages and political campaigns like a wrecking ball, leaving Winston to clean up the mess while dodging Luftwaffe bombs. Diana struggles with mental health. Her marriage collapses and her suicide attempts haunt the family. Sarah? She's a talented actress but picks awful husbands, one of whom Winston has to bribe to get lost. Mary's the only one who seems remotely functional, but even she's stuck in the shadow of a father who's more myth than man. Absurdity alert. While Churchill's rallying the nation with blood, toil, tears, and sweat, his own house is a circus of dysfunction. Survival means juggling war cabinets and family meltdowns, often from the same damn bed. Now, let's talk money, because Churchill's finances are a scandal in themselves. The man's a walking paradox, born into aristocracy, yet perpetually broke. Blenheim Palace upbringing. Sure, but by the 1920s, he's drowning in debt from gambling, bad investments, and a lifestyle that screams champagne wishes, caviar dreams. He buys Chartwell, his Kent estate, in 1922, thinking it's a cozy retreat. Reality? A money pit that nearly bankrupts him. Renovations bleed cash, staff salaries pile up, and Winston's solution is to write, feverishly, obsessively, from bed. Articles, books, histories of everything from Marlborough to the English-speaking peoples dictated to secretaries who probably deserve medals for patience. By the 1930s, he's churning out words faster than a printing press, but the taxman's circling like a vulture. Irony? He's warning Britain about Hitler while dodging creditors who'd repossess his cigar collection if they could. Speaking of cigars, let's address the elephant in the room. Churchill's vices. The man's a human smokestack, puffing 8 to 10 Cuban cigars daily, each costing more than a worker's weekly wage. His drinking? Legendary. Breakfast brandy, midday champagne, evening scotch, late-night whiskey, sometimes all in one day. He once quipped, "I've taken more out of alcohol than alcohol has taken out of me," which is less a boast and more a cry for help. Doctors warn he's killing himself. He laughs, pours another. Bed becomes his enabler, a safe haven where he can sip, smoke, and strategize without judgmental stares. The pain? His body's a ticking time bomb. Heart issues, ulcers, a 1941 stroke he hides from everyone. Survival means defying death with every puff, every glass, every nap. But the real scandal isn't just personal, it's political. Churchill's bed-bound leadership style isn't just eccentric, it's a middle finger to the establishment that shunned him for years. The 1930s wilderness years? Brutal. He's mocked as a has-been, a Cassandra screaming about German rearmament, while Chamberlain and his umbrella fetish wave peace for our time. Churchill's speeches, often drafted from bed, are ignored by MPs who'd rather sip tea than face reality. When he's finally PM, the old guard, stiff-lipped lords and bureaucrats, cringe at his methods. Meetings at 10 Downing Street? Nah, try his bedroom, where generals salute a pajama-clad Winston as he sketches invasion plans on napkins. Absurdity. The fate of democracy hinges on a man who treats his four-poster like a throne. Let's zoom in on 1940 to 41, the Blitz's peak. London's burning, 60,000 civilians will die by war's end. Neighborhoods reduced to rubble. Churchill's bed at number 10 or the cabinet war rooms becomes mission control. He wakes to air raid sirens, reads dispatches by lamplight, dictates orders while munching toast. Secretaries, like Elizabeth Nell, describe scenes straight out of a fever dream. Winston, half buried in papers, cigar ash snowing on sheets, growling about U-boat losses while a valet refills his glass. Pain? Every bombing report is a dagger. Kids orphaned, factories gone, morale teetering. He visits bomb sites, tears streaming, but back in bed, he's steel, crafting speeches that glue a nation together. "We shall never surrender" wasn't born in Parliament. It was scrawled in bed, fueled by defiance and desperation. The irony thickens when you consider his allies. Churchill's begging America for help, but Roosevelt's playing hard to get. Their 1941 Placentia Bay meeting, Churchill dictating from a ship's bunk, seasick but stubborn, births the Atlantic Charter, a lofty vision for a free world. Meanwhile, he's propping up an empire that's anything but free. India's starving. Bengal's famine looms. 1943, millions dead. And Churchill's callous quips about Gandhi, that half-naked fakir, reveal a blind spot. He's saving civilization while clinging to colonial delusions, a contradiction that screams historical absurdity. Survival? It's walking a tightrope between hero and villain, often from a mattress. Then there's the betrayal angle. Churchill's loyal to Britain, but loyalty's a one-way street. His own party, the Conservatives, never fully trust him. They remember his liberal defection, his Gallipoli fiasco, his gold standard blunder. When he becomes PM, it's not love, it's desperation. Even during the war, colleagues plot behind his back, whispering he's too old, too erratic. Clement Attlee, his deputy, eyes the top job. The public? They adore his voice on the BBC, but by 1945, they'll kick him to the curb. Spoiler, after VE Day, Churchill loses the election to Labour in a landslide. The man who beat Hitler can't beat the ballot box. Irony doesn't get sharper than that. Back to the bed. Why does it matter? It's not just laziness, it's strategy. Churchill's brain works best in chaos, and bed is his controlled chaos. No rigid office hours, no stuffy protocol. He naps, 2 hours daily, non-negotiable, recharging for late-night war councils. He dictates thousands of words from memos to memoirs without leaving the sheets. His staff? Traumatized but efficient, juggling typewriters and teacups as bombs fall. The absurdity. While Hitler's in bunkers plotting annihilation, Churchill's in bed plotting salvation, proving leadership isn't about posture, it's about results. But let's not gloss over the pain. War takes its toll. By 1942, Churchill's pushing 70, his health crumbling. Pneumonia nearly kills him in Carthage, 1943. He dictates his will, joking about meeting St. Peter in his siren suit. Strokes hit, hidden from the public. His daughter Diana's mental collapse worsens. Randolph's scandals embarrass. Clementine's exhausted, retreating to sanatoriums for rest cures. The empire's fraying. India's rebellion grows. Colonies demand freedom. Churchill's fighting for a world that's slipping away, and bed's his only refuge. Sarcastic dive into the nightmare. Imagine being his valet. You're ironing silk pajamas while the Luftwaffe buzzes overhead, praying a bomb doesn't land on the laundry, or a secretary decoding Winston's mumbles through cigar smoke, typing speeches that'll echo for centuries. The absurdity, you're saving democracy, but your boss is yelling about missing socks. Survival, grit, caffeine, and a sense of humor. By 1942, the tide's turning. Rommel's pushed back, America's in, Russia's bleeding Hitler dry. Churchill's bedbound genius peaks. He plans D-Day from pillows, sketches post-war Europe with Roosevelt and Stalin, all while dodging assassination plots. Yes, the Nazis tried. But every victory costs. Bengal's famine stains his legacy. His fight them on the beaches. Bravado doesn't feed starving millions. History's cruel irony. The man who saves the West dooms the East. As 1943 rolls in, Churchill's still in bed, but the world's shifting. He's less savior, more symbol. Conferences in Tehran, Cairo, Yalta, bedside prep for each, dictating strategies that shape the Cold War. His health's a wreck, but he's unstoppable, fueled by cigars, booze, and sheer bloody-mindedness. The pain? Knowing the empire's done, his vision of Britain fading. The absurdity? He's rewriting history from a mattress, a king in pajamas ruling a crumbling kingdom. What's your take? Could you handle Churchill's chaos? Comment below with your wildest crisis story, and stay tuned for part 3, where we unravel the final war years and the betrayal that breaks him. Like, subscribe, and let's keep diving into this historical circus. Here we go, diving headfirst into part 3 of Winston Churchill's bedbound epic, where the absurdity of history hits fever pitch, the irony cuts like a bayonet, and the pain of survival feels like a punch you didn't see coming. If you're just joining us, you've missed the cigar-chomping, whiskey-soaked chaos of Churchill running World War II from his mattress, dodging bombs and family scandals while Britain hangs by a thread. Go watch parts 1 and 2 because this train's screaming toward the climax, and it's not slowing down. Here's your hook. Ever wonder what it takes to win a war, lose an empire, and get kicked out of office? All while barely leaving your bed? Churchill did it, and it's a masterclass in glorious, messy survival. Stick around for the wildest chapter yet and drop a comment. What's the biggest betrayal you've ever faced? Let's see if it tops Winston's fall from grace. It's 1943 and the world's a furnace. The Allies are clawing back ground. Stalingrad's a Soviet win. North Africa's turning and D-Day's a glimmer on the horizon. But Churchill, now pushing 70, is a walking, or rather lounging, contradiction. He's Britain's bulldog, growling defiance, but his body's betraying him faster than a Vichy collaborator. Strokes, pneumonia, heart palpitations. He's one cigar away from a one-way ticket to the hereafter. Yet, there he is, propped up in bed at number 10 Downing Street, silk pajamas drenched in sweat, dictating orders to secretaries who've seen more of his hairy chest than they ever signed up for. Why bed? It's his fortress, his middle finger to a world that's been trying to break him since he was a stuttering kid at Harrow. Absurd? You bet. While Hitler's screaming in bunkers, Churchill's ruling from a four-poster, proving history's greatest battles are won by the stubborn, not the spry. Let's set the scene. London's still licking its wounds from the Blitz, but the tide's shifting. The US is finally in, pumping ships, planes, and spam into the war effort. Russia's bleeding the Nazis dry, and Churchill's juggling global strategy like a circus act gone wrong. His bedroom? A war room that smells like cigars and regret. Breakfast at 7:30 a.m. Eggs, bacon, toast, a splash of brandy in the coffee. Because why face Armageddon sober? Then the papers, Times, Telegraph, coded dispatches, scattered across the sheets like a general's battle map. Secretaries perch on chairs, pencils trembling as Winston rants about U-boat sinkings or Stalin's latest demands. Generals and admirals file in, saluting a man who looks like he's auditioning for a Roman emperor biopic. Irony alert, the fate of the free world hinges on a guy who hasn't worn pants before noon since 1940. But the pain's real, and it's everywhere. Churchill's health is a house of cards. In December 1943, he's in Carthage, planning invasions, when pneumonia hits like a panzer. He's flat on his back, dictating his will from a makeshift sickbed, joking he'll negotiate with God in his siren suit. Doctors pump him with drugs, sulfa, not penicillin, because the 1940s medical kit is basically leeches with better PR. He pulls through, but the scare's a wake-up call he ignores. Back in London, he's back to bedbound command, ignoring chest pains and slurring through speeches. The toll? His family's fraying. Clementine's exhausted, retreating to rest cures to escape the chaos. Daughter Diana's mental health spirals. Her 1943 breakdown leaves Winston gutted, but he's too busy saving Europe to be a dad. Randolph's drunken antics humiliate the family. Sarah's marriage implodes. Mary, the good kid, joins the ATS, dodging bombs while her father dodges creditors. Speaking of money, Churchill's finances are still a dumpster fire. Chartwell's a black hole, sucking up cash faster than he can write books. He's churning out articles and memoirs from bed, dictating thousands of words to pay off debts that would make a Maharaja wince. Irony? He's saving Britain while begging American tycoons for loans to keep his estate. In 1943, a syndicate of pals buys Chartwell to save him from bankruptcy. Imagine the humiliation. The man rallying, "We shall never surrender," is surrendering his pride to stay afloat. Absurdity, he's fighting for an empire while his own house is a battlefield of bills and bailouts. Now, let's talk global politics, because the scandals here are spicier than Churchill's curry lunches. The big three, Churchill, Roosevelt, Stalin, are carving up the post-war world, and Winston's bed is ground zero for strategy. Tehran Conference, November 1943. He drags himself from a Cairo sickbed to face Stalin's smirk and FDR's wheelchair-bound charm. Stalin mocks his late mornings, but Churchill, fresh from a nap, outwits the dictator on Poland's borders. He dictates prep notes from hotel beds, cigar ash dusting the sheets while plotting D-Day in the Balkans. The pain? He knows Britain's fading. America's the new kid on the block, Russia's a bear with a bigger army, and the British Empire's a leaky ship. India's rebelling, Gandhi's hunger strikes are global news, and Churchill's callous dismissal, "he's not dead yet," stains his halo. Bengal's famine, peaking in 1943, kills millions while he prioritizes war supplies. History's nightmare, saving democracy means starving colonies. Back home, the political knives are out. Churchill's Conservative Party never loved him. He's a turncoat who jumped to the Liberals and back, and they haven't forgotten Gallipoli or the Gold Standard fiasco. His war cabinet's a snake pit. Anthony Eden, Foreign Secretary, plays loyal but dreams of the top job. Clement Attlee, Labour's deputy PM, nods politely while plotting a socialist future. Churchill's speeches, crafted in bed, delivered in Parliament, keep the nation fired up, but whispers grow. He's too old, too erratic, too obsessed with empire. The absurdity, he's winning the war while losing his grip on power. Survival means outmaneuvering allies as much as enemies, all from a mattress stained with ink and port. Let's zoom in on 1944, the war's turning point. D-Day, June 6th, Operation Overlord storms Normandy, and Churchill's been planning it from bed for months. Maps pinned to walls, dispatches cluttering the duvet. He argues with Eisenhower over strategy while munching cold chicken. He wants to watch the invasion from a ship, madness for a 70-year-old with a dodgy ticker. But Clementine and King George VI talk him down. The pain? Every casualty report hits like a sledgehammer. Tens of thousands die on Normandy's beaches, and Churchill weeps privately, haunted by Gallipoli's ghosts. Publicly, he's still rallying Parliament with speeches that echo across the Atlantic. This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. Bed-born words forged in defiance. But the scandals keep piling up. Churchill's imperial blind spot is glaring. He clings to India like a kid with a broken toy, ignoring cries for independence. In 1944, he meets Roosevelt in Quebec, sketching post-war plans from a hotel bed. FDR pushes for a freer world. Churchill pushes back, desperate to save the empire. The irony? He's fighting for freedom while chaining colonies. Bengal's famine becomes a global embarrassment. Churchill blames locals for breeding like vermin, a quote that makes your skin crawl. Survival means moral compromises that history won't forgive. He knows it, but beds his escape, where he can bury guilt in paperwork and whiskey. Then there's Yalta, February 1945. Churchill, Roosevelt, Stalin, three giants all ailing, carving up Europe like a roast. Winston's prepping from a Crimean hotel bed, battling flu and exhaustion. Stalin grabs Eastern Europe. FDR's too weak to push back. Churchill's outmaneuvered sowing Cold War seeds. He knows Britain's a junior partner now. America and Russia hold the cards. The pain? Watching his empire crumble while he's hailed as a savior. Absurdity? He's dictating the future of nations while propped on pillows, a king in decline. Victory in Europe, May 1945. Churchill announces it from Downing Street, but the prep? Bedside, as always. Crowds cheer, London erupts, but the betrayal's coming. July 1945, general election. Churchill's campaigning, but his heart's not in it. He's 70, knackered, and the public's done with war heroes. They want Labour's welfare state, not empire dreams. Results roll in, Churchill's crushed, conservatives obliterated. The man who beat Hitler loses to Attlee's socialism. He learns the news in bed, cigar smoldering, and quips. They have a perfect right to kick me out. Irony doesn't get crueler. Survival, swallowing pride, retreating to Chartwell, and firing up the typewriter. Post-election, bed remains his refuge. He paints, writes, licks wounds. His war memoirs, 6 volumes, Nobel Prize winning, start taking shape, dictated to secretaries who dodge cigar ash and tears. The pain's raw, Britain's broke, empire's fading, and he's a has-been at 70. But the absurdity? He's still scheming, plotting a comeback, because Churchill doesn't quit. By 1946, he's in America, delivering the Iron Curtain speech, warning of Soviet threats. Yup, prepped from a hotel bed. History's nightmare. The man who won the war starts another, all while napping. Sarcastic dive into the chaos. Imagine being his staff. You're a secretary typing 3,000-word speeches while bombs shake the windows, or a valet polishing boots as Winston rants about de Gaulle's ego. The absurdity, you're saving the world, but your boss is yelling about a missing bath duck. Survival, grit, loyalty, and a stiff drink after shifts. Churchill's bed routine, naps, dictation, meals, keeps him alive, but it's hell for everyone else. As 1945 fades, Churchill's legacy is a paradox. Hero to some, villain to others. He saved democracy but propped up an empire that crushed millions. His bed-bound brilliance, speeches, strategies, defiance, changed history, but the cost? A body broken, a family fractured, a nation that thanks him with a pink slip. The irony, his greatest strength was his weakness, his refusal to bend until the world bent instead. What's your take? Could you survive Churchill's betrayals? Comment below with your wildest story of being stabbed in the back, and stay tuned for part 4, where we wrap this saga with his final years and the legacy that won't quit. Like, subscribe, and let's keep unraveling this historical madness. Welcome to the grand finale of Winston Churchill's bedbound odyssey, where history's absurdity reaches its peak. The irony is sharper than a Spitfire's propeller, and the pain of survival feels like a hangover from a decade-long bender. If you've missed the first 3 parts, you're late to the party. Churchill's been running World War II from his mattress, juggling cigars, scandals, and an empire crumbling faster than his health. Go binge those episodes because this train's screeching to its final stop, and it's a doozy. Here's your hook. Ever wonder what happens when the world's greatest wartime leader gets kicked to the curb, only to claw his way back, all while barely leaving his bed? This is Churchill's last act, glorious, messy, and dripping with defiance. Stick around and drop a comment. What's the most epic comeback you've ever pulled off? Let's see if it rivals Winston's final roar. It's July 1945, and Churchill's world just imploded. The man who stared down Hitler, crafted never-surrender speeches from his sheets, and kept Britain afloat through the Blitz has been booted out of number 10 Downing Street. The general election results are in, and Labour's Clement Attlee has swept the Conservatives into the dustbin. Churchill learns the news in bed. Where else? Cigar smoldering, whiskey glass in hand, and quips. They've a perfect right to kick me out, but it's a bit ungrateful, don't you think? The irony is brutal. The savior of democracy, rejected by the very people he saved. Britain's tired of war, rationing, and imperial dreams. They want welfare, rebuilding, and a future that doesn't smell like bomb rubble. Churchill, at 70, is a relic in their eyes, a bulldog whose growl no longer fits the peacetime tune. The pain? It's personal? He slinks back to Chartwell, his Kent manor where the bed becomes his bunker, not for war, but for wounded pride. Let's rewind a bit to unpack this betrayal. Churchill spent 5 years defying the odds, his bedroom a command center where he dictated strategies that turned the tide. D-Day, 1944, planned from pillows with maps pinned to walls and secretaries dodging cigar ash. Yalta, 1945, prepped from a Crimean hotel bed where he wrestled Stalin and a dying Roosevelt over Europe's fate. Victory in Europe, May 8, 1945, announced from Downing Street but crafted in bed where he scribbled notes while London partied. Every triumph came at a cost. His health's a wreck, with strokes and pneumonia stalking him like snipers. His family's a mess. Daughter Diana's battling demons. Randolph's a drunken liability. Sarah's marriages crash, and Clementine's on the edge, worn thin by war and Winston's chaos. Yet he kept going, fueled by naps, booze, and sheer bloody-mindedness. The absurdity? He saved the world from a mattress, only to be told, thanks, but no thanks. Post-election, Churchill's not done. Oh no, he's too stubborn for that. Bed remains his fortress as he pivots to writing, painting, and plotting a comeback. His war memoirs, a 6-volume beast that'll snag a Nobel Prize, start taking shape at Chartwell. Picture it, Winston propped on pillows, dictating thousands of words to secretaries who've mastered the art of decoding his slurred, cigar-muffled rants. He's rewriting history, literally, casting himself as the hero who saw the Nazi threat when others snoozed. Irony alert, the man who lost an election is now shaping how the world remembers the war. He churns out articles, speeches, even a history of the English-speaking peoples, all to keep the creditors at bay. Chartwell's still a money pit, and his debts could sink a battleship. Survival means grinding out words faster than a Fleet Street press, all from the comfort of his four-poster. But let's talk about the comeback. By 1946, Churchill's out of power, but not out of fight. He's invited to Missouri to speak at Westminster College. Yep, prepped from a hotel bed, and drops the Iron Curtain speech, warning the world about Soviet expansion. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an Iron Curtain has descended across the continent. Boom! Cold War coined, and Churchill's back as a global prophet. The pain? He knows Britain's a shadow of its former self, a junior partner to America's rising star. The empire's unraveling, India's independence looms, colonies are slipping away, and Churchill's clinging to a vision of Britain that's fading like a sepia photograph. Absurdity. He's sounding alarms about a new threat while the world he fought for crumbles. His health's a nightmare. By the late 1940s, strokes are piling up. 1946, 1949. Each one hushed up to keep the myth alive. Doctors beg him to quit smoking. 10 cigars a day, please. Cut the booze. Champagne, whiskey, brandy, repeat. But Churchill laughs them off. I've lived too long to start behaving now, he growls, pouring another scotch from his bedside table. Clementine's at her wit's end, dodging his temper and her own exhaustion. The kids? Diana's mental health worsens, culminating in tragedy later. Randolph's a lost cause, gambling and drinking his way to obscurity. Sarah's chasing Hollywood dreams, but her personal life's a wreck. Mary's the only anchor, but even she can't glue the family together. The pain of survival is carrying a legacy that's crushing everyone around you. Yet, Churchill's got one last act. 1951, another election, and he's back as Prime Minister at 76, a creaking monument to defiance. The bed routine's non-negotiable now. His body's too frail for desks. Breakfast at 8 a.m., eggs, bacon, coffee with a brandy chaser. Then, papers, memos, speeches, all dictated to a revolving cast of secretaries who deserve hazard pay. Cabinet meetings? Often bedside, with ministers perched awkwardly as Winston, in siren suit or pajamas, rants about nationalizing steel or arming against Russia. The absurdity, Britain's a broke post-war shell, yet its leaders running the show like it's 1940, complete with naps and noon baths with rubber ducks. His second term's a mixed bag. The empire's collapsing, India's gone by 1947, and Churchill's bitter rants about losing the jewel in the crown don't help. He pushes for a stronger Commonwealth, but it's a band-aid on a sinking ship. At home, he's out of touch. Labor's welfare state is the future. and his imperial nostalgia feels like a museum piece. Health-wise, he's a wreck. A major stroke in 1953 leaves him slurring, barely able to walk, but he hides it, propped up by AIDS and sheer grit. The pain? Knowing he's past his prime, clinging to power while the world moves on. Irony, the man who defied Hitler can't defy time. Let's dive into the scandals of these years, because Churchill's not just fighting gravity, he's dodging gossip that could sink him. His drinking's legendary, staff whisper he's pickled by noon, yet he outlives half his critics. His racism, brushed off as of his time, rears up in ugly ways. He opposes immigration, calls Africans savages in private, and fights to keep Britain white. The Bengal famine's shadow lingers. His wartime policies starved millions, and post-war, he shrugs off guilt. History's nightmare, a hero to the west, a villain to the east. His bed's no longer just a war room, it's a shield from accountability. By 1955, he's done. Another stroke forces retirement, and he steps down, handing the reins to Anthony Eden. Churchill retreats to Chartwell, but bed remains his kingdom. He paints gloomy seascapes, sunlit Riviera villas, writes more memoirs, and entertains guests who marvel at his wit and frailty. The Nobel Prize for Literature comes in 1953, a nod to his words, many born from that very mattress. But the pain's unrelenting. Diana's suicide in 1963 breaks him. Randolph dies young. Clementine's fading. Churchill's last years are a slow fade, strokes piling up until January 24th, 1965, when he slips away at 90, in bed, where else? The legacy? A paradox wrapped in a cigar. Churchill saved democracy, but his imperial obsession left scars. India, Bengal, Kenya's Mau Mau rebellion. His bed-bound brilliance, speeches, strategies, defiance, changed history, but the cost was a fractured family, a broken body, and a nation that moved on without him. Absurdity. He ruled from repose, proving powers not in posture, but in persistence. Irony. The man who never surrendered to time. Pain, carrying the weight of a world that both worshipped and rejected him. Sarcastic immersion. Imagine being his final secretary. You're typing his memoirs as he mumbles through cigar smoke, the room reeking of scotch and regret, or his valet ironing pajamas while he rants about Khrushchev. The absurdity. You're preserving a legend, but he's yelling about a lost sock. Survival, loyalty, patience, and a dark sense of humor. So, why bed half the day? It was his rebellion against a world that tried to break him. From neglectful parents to Nazi bombs to ungrateful voters. A sarcastic flip at convention, a painful adaptation to frailty, a stage for genius in a history gone mad. Churchill's bed wasn't just a quirk. It was his battlefield, his sanctuary, his throne. What's your take? Could you pull off a Churchill-level comeback? Comment below with your wildest story of bouncing back, and let us know if this saga blew your mind. Like, subscribe, and share if you're obsessed with history's glorious chaos. Thanks for riding this roller coaster. Now go conquer your own mattress empire. Ever cheated on a pop quiz? The punishment was probably a stern look from your teacher. Ever cheated on your spouse in, say, 12th century France? Well, let's just say the punishment involved less detention and more public dismemberment. Welcome to history's most brutal game show, Adultery's Price is Right, where the only prize is surviving with all your limbs attached. Think your love life is complicated? Stick around and you'll be thanking your lucky stars you weren't born a few centuries earlier. So, you've swiped right, you've had a little harmless flirtation, maybe even shared a dessert with someone who wasn't your legally sanctioned ball and chain. In our modern world, the worst you might face is an awkward conversation and a few teary-eyed nights on the couch. But transport yourself back in time, and that seemingly innocent indiscretion could land you in a world of hurt, humiliation, and quite frankly, a very messy public execution. Welcome, dear viewers, to the grand and grotesque theater of public punishments for adultery, a historical deep dive that will make your worst dating stories sound like a delightful walk in the park. Before we wade into the blood and guts of it all, let's set the stage. Why was adultery such a monumental life or death issue for our ancestors? In an age before DNA testing and paternity leave, a woman's fidelity was paramount to ensuring that the family's land, titles, and precious collection of slightly used chainmail went to a legitimate heir. A man's dalliance, on the other hand, was often seen as a minor transgression, a bit of harmless fun, unless, of course, he was foolish enough to get involved with another man's wife. Then, all hell broke loose. It was less about love and more about property rights, and woe betide anyone who messed with the established order of things. Let's begin our journey in the ancient world, a time of togas, epic poetry, and some truly inventive ways to punish those who dared to stray. In ancient Rome, a society that gave us aqueducts, sanitation, and the concept of a republic, they also had some rather unsanitary views on marital fidelity. The paterfamilias, the head of the Roman household, held the power of life and death over his family. If his wife was caught in the act, he had the legal right to kill both her and her lover on the spot. No trial, no jury, just a swift and brutal end. Talk about a heated argument. However, if the husband was feeling particularly merciful, or perhaps just didn't want to stain the new mosaic floor, he could opt for a more public spectacle. The adulterous couple might be paraded through the streets, naked and covered in filth, while the townsfolk hurled insults, rotten vegetables, and whatever else they had to hand. It was the original reality TV, and the ratings were always through the roof. But the Romans, for all their brutality, had a certain legalistic flair. They even passed laws about it. The Lex Julia de Adulteris Coercendis, introduced by Emperor Augustus, made adultery a public crime. The punishment? Banishment to a remote island, where the guilty parties could contemplate their sins while fending off seagulls and existential dread. A bit of a step up from instant death, I suppose, but still not exactly a dream vacation. Now, let's hop over to the ancient Near East, where things get even more creative. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest and most complete written legal codes, had a particularly elegant solution for adultery. If a man's wife was caught with another man, the two of them were to be bound together and thrown into the river. If the husband, in his infinite wisdom, chose to spare his wife, then the king could also pardon her lover. It was a buy one, get one free deal of life or death, entirely at the whim of the wronged husband. Imagine the power trip. And you thought choosing what to watch on Netflix was a big decision. The ancient Hebrews also had some very strong opinions on the matter, as outlined in the Old Testament. The book of Leviticus, for instance, is quite clear. If a man commits adultery with another man's wife, with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress are to be put to death. The preferred method? Stoning. A slow, agonizing, and very public affair, where the entire community could participate in the righteous punishment. It was a team-building exercise, really, just with a much higher body count. But what about the women, I hear you ask? Were they always the ones to bear the brunt of the punishment? Well, dear viewers, you're starting to catch on. While the man might be punished for defiling another man's property, the woman was punished for her inherent moral weakness, her supposed inability to control her base desires. It was a classic case of blaming the victim, a tradition that, sadly, has a very long and storied history. As we move into the early medieval period, the so-called Dark Ages, the punishments for adultery didn't get any less dark. In fact, they became even more localized and, if you can believe it, even more brutal. The Germanic tribes, for instance, had a particularly charming custom. An adulterous woman would have her hair shorn off, be stripped naked, and then be whipped from village to village by a mob of angry women. A truly sisterly show of support. Her lover, if caught, might be forced to hang himself over her grave, a romantic end to a tragic affair. The Vikings, those lovable seafaring adventurers, also had their own unique take on justice. An adulterous woman could be publicly flogged, have her nose and ears cut off, or even be sold into slavery. Her lover, on the other hand, might be challenged to a holmgang, a duel to the death by the wronged husband. It was a chance for him to prove his manliness and clear his name. Or, die a horrible, violent death. The Vikings were all about high stakes, but it wasn't all doom and gloom. Sometimes there was a financial option. In some cultures, the adulterer could pay a vergild, a sum of money, to the wronged husband as compensation for the damage. The amount varied depending on the social status of the people involved. The higher the status, the higher the price. So if you were going to have an affair, it was best to do it with someone of a lower social standing. A bit of financial planning could save you a lot of trouble. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is all terribly grim, but it's also a fascinating, if horrifying, window into the values and beliefs of our ancestors. It's a world where honor was everything, where a woman's body was a man's property, and where justice was often a public spectacle, a form of entertainment for the masses. It's a world that is, thankfully, a far cry from our own, or is it? Before we move on to the witch-burning frenzy of the late medieval period and the puritanical punishments of the early modern era, I want to hear from you. What do you think is the most bizarre, the most unjust, or the most downright insane punishment we've talked about so far? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're at it, maybe give this video a like and a subscribe, so you don't miss the next installment of our descent into the madness of human history. But back to the blood and gore. One of the recurring themes we see in these early punishments is the element of public shaming. It wasn't enough to simply punish the offenders. The entire community had to be involved. The shaming was a way of reinforcing social norms, of reminding everyone of the consequences of stepping out of line. The shearing of a woman's hair, for example, was a powerful symbol of her loss of femininity and social standing. Being paraded naked through the streets was a way of stripping her of her dignity and her humanity. These weren't just punishments, they were rituals, designed to cleanse the community of the moral stain of adultery. And what about the legal systems of the time? Were there any courts, any trials, any semblance of due process? Well, yes and no. While some cultures had formal legal codes, the application of those laws was often arbitrary and subject to the whims of the local lord or the passions of the mob. Evidence was often flimsy, based on gossip, rumor, and a healthy dose of misogyny. A woman's word was worth less than a man's, and she was often presumed guilty until proven innocent. It was a legal system designed to keep women in their place, and it was brutally effective. Let's take a closer look at the ordeal, a popular method of justice in the early medieval period. If a person's guilt was in doubt, they could be subjected to an ordeal, a trial by fire or water. The accused might be forced to carry a red-hot iron bar for a certain distance, or be thrown into a river. If their wounds healed without infection, or if they sank to the bottom of the river, they were declared innocent. If they were burned or floated, they were guilty. It was a win-win situation for the accuser, and a lose-lose situation for the accused. The logic, if you can call it that, was that God would protect the innocent. A comforting thought, I'm sure, as you're about to be submerged in a freezing cold river. And it wasn't just the legal systems that were stacked against the accused. The church also played a major role in policing morality. Adultery was not just a crime, it was a sin, a grave offense against God. The punishments prescribed by the church were often just as harsh as those of the secular authorities. Public penance, flogging, and excommunication were all on the table. The adulterer was not just an outcast from society, they were an outcast from God's grace. As we stand on the precipice of the High Middle Ages, a time of crusades, cathedrals, and courtly love, the stage is set for a new chapter in the history of adultery and its punishments. The ideas of romantic love and chivalry will clash with the harsh realities of a patriarchal society, creating a fertile ground for hypocrisy, scandal, and some truly spectacular public punishments. So, buckle up, dear viewers, because things are about to get even more interesting and a whole lot more brutal. But before we delve into the world of chastity belts and public burnings, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far. The public punishments for adultery in the ancient and early medieval world were not just about justice, they were about power, control, and the preservation of a social order that was built on the subjugation of women. They were a brutal and often theatrical reminder of the consequences of defying that order. They were, in short, a nightmare. And as we continue our journey through the annals of history, we will see how these themes of power, control, and public spectacle continue to evolve, taking on new and even more terrifying forms. We will see how the rise of the state, the power of the church, and the changing social norms all contributed to the ever-shifting landscape of adultery and its punishments. We will see that the past is not just a collection of dusty old stories. It's a living, breathing thing that continues to shape our world in ways we may not even realize. So, join me next time as we explore the scandalous world of medieval adultery, where knights in shining armor were not always so chivalrous, and where the flames of passion could all too easily lead to the flames of the pyre. Until then, stay safe, stay faithful, and be glad you live in an age where a broken heart is the worst you have to fear. And don't forget to tell me in the comments what you think of this historical madness. Your engagement helps to keep these stories alive and to remind us of how far we've come. Or have we? That's a question for another time. For now, let's just revel in the glorious, gory, and utterly fascinating history of human folly. Alright, settle in, you voyeurs of historical misery, and grab a stiff drink. You're going to need it. Last time, we dipped our toes into the bloody waters of antiquity in the early Middle Ages, where adultery could get you stoned, drowned, or turned into a traveling roadshow of humiliation. If you thought that was rough, welcome to the High Middle Ages, a time of soaring cathedrals, epic crusades, and the supposedly refined concept of courtly love. Oh, it was all very romantic in the poems. Knights performing great deeds for the love of a married noblewoman, exchanging longing glances across a crowded banquet hall. But let me tell you, the moment that longing glance turned into a bit of clandestine jousting in the ladies' chambers, the poetry stopped and the public flaying began. The hypocrisy was thicker than the castle walls. This was the era where the church really got its act together, establishing a sprawling bureaucracy of sin management. Adultery wasn't just a crime against your spouse, it was a soul-destroying sin against the Almighty himself. And the church, in its infinite mercy, had a whole menu of punishments designed to save your soul while thoroughly demolishing your dignity. The most common was public penance. This wasn't just saying a few Hail Marys and calling it a day. Oh no, this was the original walk of shame, sponsored by God. An adulterer, typically the woman, would be forced to stand at the church door for weeks, sometimes months, barefoot, dressed in a rough sackcloth shift, weeping and begging for forgiveness from everyone who passed by. It was a live-action Yelp review of your moral failings, for the entire village to see. For a more severe case, you might be sentenced to a pilgrimage. This wasn't a fun backpacking trip across Europe to find yourself. This was a grueling, dangerous journey on foot to a distant shrine, often with the added humiliation of wearing chains or a specific symbol marking you as a sinner. You'd be begging for food, sleeping in ditches, and fending off bandits, all to prove your repentance. And if you survived, you got to come back to the same village where everyone still knew you as that harlot who had to walk to Rome. The shame had a longer shelf life than the bread you begged for. But the church, for all its spiritual threats, usually left the really messy physical stuff to the secular authorities. And boy, did they relish the task. While the nobility could often get away with a slap on the wrist, an annulment, a strategically advantageous divorce, or a hefty fine that was pocket change to them, the common folk were not so lucky. For them, justice was a form of public entertainment. Let's talk about a delightful practice known as carting. The guilty couple, or more often just the woman, would be placed in a dung cart. Yes, a cart used for hauling animal manure, and paraded slowly through the town. The town crier would walk ahead, announcing their crime in excruciating detail, while the good, morally upright citizens would follow behind, jeering, spitting, and pelting them with garbage, rotten eggs, and of course, more manure. It was a multi-sensory experience in degradation. This procession was often accompanied by a charivari, or rough music. This meant the townsfolk would bang pots, pans, and anything else that could make a deafening racket, creating a cacophony of chaos and shame that followed the victim through the streets. It was a medieval mob's version of a diss track, and it was brutally effective. The goal wasn't just to punish, but to utterly destroy a person's social standing, to make them a permanent outcast. After a good carting, you couldn't just go back to your life. You were marked forever, and the markings could be literal. While Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter was written in the 19th century, the idea of forcing adulterers to wear identifying symbols was very much a real thing in the Middle Ages and beyond. In some parts of France, a woman convicted of adultery had to wear a red A sewn onto her dress. In other places, the symbols were less subtle. Sometimes letters were branded directly onto the skin, on the forehead or cheek, a permanent billboard of your transgression. Imagine trying to get a job or find a new partner with adulterer seared into your face. It's a bit of a conversation starter, isn't it? Now let's talk about the gender imbalance, because it's about to go from bad to apocalyptic. Medieval law was, to put it mildly, not a fan of women. Legal texts from the period often read like a how-to guide for oppressing half the population. A man who cheated on his wife? A minor sin, a moment of weakness. He might have to pay a fine to his wife's family, a sort of sorry I borrowed your property without asking fee. But a woman who cheated on her husband? She hadn't just broken a vow, she had committed a crime against the fundamental laws of property and inheritance. She had threatened the purity of the bloodline. She was a danger to the very fabric of society, and the punishment had to reflect that. So, while a man might get a fine, his female partner in crime could expect something far worse. In many parts of Europe, the law allowed a husband to kill his wife and her lover if he caught them in the act. This wasn't considered murder, it was justifiable homicide. The German law book known as the Sachsenspiegel from the 13th century is quite clear on this. If a man finds another man with his wife in the act, he can kill them both with impunity. He was just cleaning house, really. If he was feeling less final, he could opt for mutilation. The cutting off of the nose was a particularly popular choice for adulterous women. Why the nose? Because it was a highly visible disfigurement, a way of permanently marking her as damaged goods and destroying her beauty, which was seen as her primary asset. Her lover might get off with being castrated, a punishment that was both symbolic and brutally practical. It was a system designed not for justice, but for terror, a way of ensuring that women remained under the absolute control of their husbands. And what about that most infamous of medieval inventions, the chastity belt? That iron contraption of locks and keys designed to physically prevent a woman from straying. Well, I have to be honest with you, it's mostly a myth. While a few weird examples exist, they are likely from later periods and were probably more curiosities or, frankly, kinky gadgets than a widespread method of marital control. The reality is, they didn't need chastity belts. They had something far more effective, a culture of constant surveillance, public shaming, and the ever-present threat of gruesome, violent death. A chastity belt was redundant when the entire village was your warden and the local executioner was on speed dial. The legal process for proving adultery was, as you can imagine, a complete farce. The standard of proof was supposed to be catching the couple in flagrante delicto, literally, in the blazing offense. But in practice, accusations were often enough. A jealous husband, a spurned lover, a gossiping neighbor, any of these could lead to a woman being dragged before a court. Her testimony was worth less than a man's, and she was often subjected to humiliating physical examinations to prove her guilt. The system was designed to find her guilty. Think of the psychological torment. Living in a world where a single misstep, a single rumor, could lead to your complete and utter destruction. It wasn't just about avoiding affairs, it was about avoiding the appearance of an affair. Don't talk to another man for too long. Don't laugh too loudly at his jokes. Don't be seen alone with him. Every interaction was a potential landmine. The pressure must have been immense, a constant low-grade terror that governed every aspect of a woman's life. As we creep towards the end of the Middle Ages, things are about to get even darker. The Black Death will sweep across Europe, killing a third of the population and leaving behind a world steeped in fear, paranoia, and religious extremism. People will be looking for scapegoats, for sinners to blame for God's wrath, and who better to blame than a woman who has already been branded as morally corrupt. The line between an adulteress and a witch will begin to blur, and the punishments will escalate from public shaming to public burning. The pyre is being built, the kindling is being gathered, and the age of witch hunts is dawning. But before we light the match and dive into the fiery hellscape of the Reformation and the Renaissance, I want you to pause and think about it. What do you think would be a worse fate? A swift, violent death at the hands of a betrayed husband, or a life of endless public shame, marked and mutilated for all to see? Let me know your grim choice in the comments. Your morbid curiosity fuels this dark journey through the past. And make sure you're subscribed, because in the next chapter we're going to see how the invention of the printing press, the splitting of the church, and a continent-wide obsession with Satan will turn the punishment of adultery into a full-blown blood sport. Trust me, you haven't seen anything yet, so you survived the Middle Ages. Congratulations. You dodged the dung cart, avoided having your nose sliced off, and managed not to be justifiably murdered by your spouse. You'd think humanity, having stumbled out of that particular cesspit of superstition and brutality, would be heading for a brighter, more enlightened future. After all, this is the Renaissance, the rebirth of art, science, and philosophy. Surely we were about to get a bit more reasonable. Oh, you sweet, naive, historically illiterate fool. Welcome to the early modern period, where humanity didn't get less brutal, it just got more organized about it. The punishments for adultery were about to go from a chaotic village free-for-all to a state-sponsored, bureaucratically managed, full-blown blood sport. The single biggest catalyst for this new wave of moral terror was a little thing called the Protestant Reformation. When Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to that church door, he didn't just challenge the Pope, he unleashed a continent-wide anxiety attack. Suddenly, everyone was obsessed with proving they were the real Christians, the truly godly ones. And what's the best way to prove how holy your community is? By punishing sinners with an almost gleeful ferocity. It became a twisted sort of civic pride. Adultery wasn't just a personal failing anymore. It was a stain on the entire town, a crack in the foundation of their new, purer society that had to be violently scrubbed out before God decided to smite them all. Nowhere was this more terrifyingly realized than in John Calvin's Geneva. Imagine a city run by your most judgmental, sanctimonious neighborhood watch captain, but with the power of life and death. That was Geneva in the mid-16th century. Calvin established the consistory, a sort of morality police force, whose job it was to peer into every window and listen at every door. They regulated everything from what you could name your child to how loudly you could laugh in public. And adultery? That was the ultimate sin, a direct assault on Calvin's vision of a perfectly ordered godly society. The punishments were swift and severe. First-time offenders might be imprisoned or exiled, but for repeat offenders, or for cases deemed particularly scandalous, the penalty was death. Men were typically beheaded while women were drowned in the Rhone River. There was no room for mercy in the city of God. It was a terrifying glimpse into a world where religious idealism curdles into totalitarian control. But this new religious fervor had a much darker, more insidious side effect. It poured gasoline on the smoldering embers of misogyny and superstition, and ignited the great witch hunts that would plague Europe for the next 2 centuries. And what, you may ask, does adultery have to do with witchcraft? In the paranoid mind of the 16th and 17th centuries, everything. You see, the era's leading experts on witchcraft, like the authors of the infamous Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, were utterly convinced that women were morally weak, sexually insatiable creatures, and therefore prime recruits for Satan. The book literally states that all witchcraft comes from carnal lust, which is in women insatiable. Now, picture this. A woman in a village is accused of adultery. Whether true or not, she is immediately branded as sexually deviant, a slave to her lust. She is shamed, ostracized, and cast out. She becomes the town's designated sinner. A few months later, a child falls ill, or a livestock herd mysteriously dies. Who is everyone going to look at? The woman who has already proven she lacks moral fiber, the one who has already demonstrated a weakness for forbidden temptations. The logic was simple and terrifying. The devil tempts mortals with promises of worldly pleasure, especially carnal pleasure. This woman has already succumbed to the sin of the flesh through adultery. It was a terrifyingly small leap to assume she'd made a formal pact with the Prince of Darkness himself. The accusation of adultery became the gateway drug to an accusation of witchcraft, and the punishment for witchcraft wasn't a dunk in the river or a few hours in the stocks. It was death by fire. Thousands upon thousands of people, overwhelmingly women, were tortured into confessing to impossible crimes and then burned alive at the stake. And for many, their nightmare began with a simple rumor of infidelity. Meanwhile, across the English Channel and over the Atlantic, in the New World, the Puritans were busy building their own version of a godly society, and they brought with them a whole new toolkit of psychologically devastating punishments. These were people who had crossed an ocean to create a city upon a hill, a beacon of moral purity, and they were not about to let a little hanky-panky ruin it. This is the world that gave us the most iconic punishment for adultery in the English-speaking world, the Scarlet Letter. Yes, Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel was based on a very real practice. While it might not have always been a beautifully embroidered A, adulterers were forced to wear symbols, letters, or words sewn onto their clothes, marking them for all to see. In 1658, Plymouth colony law mandated that anyone convicted of adultery must be publicly whipped and wear 2 capital letters visitors A and D, cut out in cloth and sewed on their uppermost garments on their arm and your back. This wasn't a temporary punishment. This was a life sentence of shame. Every time you walked into the market, every time you went to church, every time you saw your own reflection, you were reminded of your sin. It was a form of psychological torture, designed to make you a walking, breathing sermon on the wages of sin. But the Puritans had other toys in their box of shame. There were the stocks and the pillory, wooden frames where an offender would be locked by their ankles, wrists, and neck and left helpless in the center of town. Here, they were not just a spectacle, they were a target. The righteous citizens would pelt them with a delightful medley of rotten fruit, dead animals, rocks, and human excrement. You could be left there for hours, even days, exposed to the elements and the unceasing scorn of your neighbors. It was humiliation as a community-building exercise. And for women who were deemed too outspoken, too rebellious, a category that adulteresses often fell into, there was the ducking stool. The victim was strapped into a chair attached to the end of a long wooden beam, which was then used to repeatedly plunge her into the local river or pond. It was a form of public waterboarding, often performed in the dead of winter. The goal was to cool her hot tongue or quench her fiery passions. If she survived the repeated near drownings and hypothermia, she was considered properly chastened. If she didn't, well, at least her soul was clean. Of course, the grand hypocrisy of class and power was alive and well. While commoners were being branded, whipped, and drowned for their transgressions, the elites were playing by a different set of rules entirely. King Henry VIII of England wanted to ditch his wife for his mistress, Anne Boleyn. When the Pope wouldn't grant him an annulment, he didn't end up in the stocks. He broke with the Catholic Church, declared himself the head of a new church, and married his mistress anyway. The most powerful men could literally rewrite the laws of God and man to accommodate their desires. For a king, adultery wasn't a sin, it was foreign policy. For a peasant girl, a stolen kiss could be a death sentence. This era, from the Reformation to the dawn of the Enlightenment, perfected the art of public shaming. It harnessed the power of the newly invented printing press to spread moral panics, used the authority of both church and state to enforce a rigid code of conduct, and fused sexual anxiety with satanic terror. The punishments were designed not just to hurt the body, but to annihilate the self, to strip a person of their identity, their community, and their very humanity, leaving them as nothing more than a symbol of sin. And as we move into the so-called Age of Reason, the 18th century, you'd think this madness would finally subside, but reason can be just as cruel as faith. The public spectacles might begin to fade, but they will be replaced by something quieter, more insidious, and perhaps even more horrifying: the cold, scientific, and systematic punishment of the mind. The asylum, the penitentiary, and the soul-crushing judgment of a society obsessed with respectability are waiting just around the corner. So, here's a question for you to ponder in the comments. What's the more terrifying tool of control? The threat of public, physical violence like the whipping post, or the threat of lifelong, inescapable psychological shame, like the Scarlet Letter? Let me know which nightmare you'd choose, and stick around for our final chapter, where we'll see how adultery goes from a crime punished by the state to a sickness treated by doctors, and how the echoes of these brutal histories still haunt our modern world. You won't want to miss the grand finale of this cavalcade of human misery. Alright, you brave souls, you've made it to the final act. You've waded through the rivers of antiquity, you've survived the public shamings of the medieval world, and you've dodged the witch hunter's pyre. We now arrive in the so-called Age of Reason, the 18th and 19th centuries. The powdered wigs are on, the philosophies are flowing, and humanity is finally becoming more civilized, right? Well, let's just say they didn't stop punishing adultery. They just started doing it in a way that was more passive-aggressive. The brutal, visceral theater of the stocks and the whipping post began to fall out of fashion, not necessarily out of compassion, but because the upper classes started to find it a bit tacky. It was unseemly. The punishment for adultery was about to move from the public square into the courtroom, the drawing room, and most terrifyingly of all, the doctor's office. Welcome to the era of the lawsuit. In 18th century England, the preferred method of dealing with a cheating wife among the wealthy was not to have her flogged, but to sue her lover in a proceeding charmingly known as criminal conversation. This wasn't a criminal trial, it was a civil suit, a financial transaction. The husband would sue the other man for damages, claiming that the seducer had, in essence, trespassed upon and damaged his private property, his wife. The entire affair was discussed in cold economic terms. Lawyers would argue about the wife's value before the affair, calculating her beauty, her virtue, her social standing, and then present a bill for the depreciation in her value. It was a customer satisfaction survey for infidelity, with the payout being a hefty sum of cash. The woman in question had no voice. She couldn't testify. She couldn't defend herself. She was merely Exhibit A, the devalued asset. If the husband won, he received a handsome payment, and his wife's reputation was utterly and irrevocably destroyed. He got rich, her lover got broke, and she became a social pariah. It was a neat, tidy, and soul-crushingly dehumanizing way to handle things. For the aristocracy, there was also the duel. While the courts were handling the financial side of things, a man's honor still had to be satisfied. A cuckolded husband might challenge his wife's lover to a duel with pistols or swords at dawn. It was a deadly piece of social theater, a way for men to settle a score over a woman as if she were a contested gambling debt. The absurdity was staggering. Two men would attempt to murder each other over a point of honor, while the woman they were fighting over was likely facing a future of complete social annihilation, regardless of who won. It was the ultimate expression of the patriarchal mindset. A woman's body was a man's property, and any unauthorized use was a matter to be settled between the property owner and the trespasser, often with a fatal outcome. Then came the 19th century, the Victorian era, an age that put a corset on the body and a straitjacket on the soul. Publicly, society was obsessed with an impossible ideal of purity, domesticity, and sexual repression. Privately, it was a pressure cooker of secret desires and rampant hypocrisy. And in this suffocating atmosphere, the punishment for female adultery took on a new and terrifyingly clinical form. It was no longer a sin to be purged or a crime to be punished, but a sickness to be cured. The new inquisitor was not a priest or a judge, but a doctor. A woman who transgressed sexually, who was unfaithful, or who even just displayed what was considered an unhealthy level of passion, was liable to be diagnosed with a whole host of fashionable new mental illnesses. The most famous of these was hysteria, a catch-all diagnosis for basically any behavior a woman exhibited that a man found inconvenient. Another popular one was nymphomania. These weren't seen as simple moral failings. They were considered symptoms of a disordered mind, a biological defect in the female brain. And what was the prescribed treatment for these so-called moral insanities? The asylum. For a Victorian man, this was the perfect solution. Having a cheating wife was a social embarrassment of the highest order. But having a sick wife? A poor, delicate creature whose mind had unfortunately come undone? That was a tragedy, a burden he could bear with noble, long-suffering dignity. With the help of a sympathetic doctor or two, a husband could have his wife legally declared insane and committed to a private asylum, often for the rest of her life. She would be locked away from the world, subjected to horrifying treatments like ice baths, electroshock therapy, and solitary confinement, all in the name of curing her of her inconvenient desires. It was a way to dispose of a wife, erase her from society, and maintain one's own reputation, all under the respectable veneer of medical science. It was a punishment that offered no spectacle, no blood, but a quiet living death, trapped in a waking nightmare while the world forgot you ever existed. The law, of course, was happy to back up this institutionalized double standard. The British Matrimonial Causes Act of 1857 is a perfect example. For the first time, it made divorce accessible through the courts rather than an act of parliament. But the grounds for divorce were explicitly unequal. A man could divorce his wife for the sole act of adultery. A woman, however, could not. She had to prove her husband was not only adulterous, but also guilty of an additional offense, such as incest, bigamy, desertion, or life-threatening cruelty. A man's infidelity was a slip-up. A woman's was a foundational betrayal that voided her entire existence as a wife and a human being. For the woman who wasn't locked away, the punishment was social death. She became a fallen woman. She would be cut off by her family, shunned by her friends, and cast out of respectable society. Her name would be struck from guest lists, her presence ignored in public. With few legal rights and limited opportunities to support herself, she often faced a choice between destitution, the workhouse, or prostitution. The scarlet letter was no longer a physical object sewn onto her dress. It was an invisible, indelible brand on her entire being, one that closed every door and condemned her to a life on the margins. As we lurch into the 20th century and towards the present day, the old laws finally begin to crumble. Adultery is slowly decriminalized across most of the Western world. The asylums are emptied, the draconian divorce laws are rewritten. It seems at last that this long, brutal history of punishment is coming to an end. But has it? Or has it just changed its form once again? We may have done away with the pillory and the ducking stool, but we have built ourselves a new one. A global, digital public square called the Internet. The human impulse to shame, to judge, and to punish those who transgress our moral codes hasn't vanished. It has merely migrated online. Today, an affair doesn't result in a public flogging, but it can result in a public shaming on an unimaginable scale. A wrong spouse can post screenshots, emails, and intimate photos for the entire world to see. Strangers by the thousands can form a digital mob, leaving vicious comments, sending death threats, and contacting the offender's employer in an attempt to get them fired. The rough music of banging pots and pans has been replaced by the deafening roar of a Twitter pylon. The carting through the village streets has become a viral post that follows you for the rest of your life, forever enshrined in the digital archives of the Internet. We have created the permanent, searchable, global scarlet letter. The tools have become more sophisticated, the reach more extensive, but the fundamental instinct remains disturbingly familiar. From the stoning pits of the ancient world to the comment sections of today, the story of punishing adultery has been a story of power, control, and the brutal enforcement of social norms, overwhelmingly at the expense of women. It's a dark and twisted journey that shows us not just the cruelty of our ancestors, but the uncomfortable truths about ourselves. The desire to cast the first stone is a deeply human one, and we've simply traded our stones for smartphones. So, after this descent into the historical abyss, I leave you with one final question to debate in the comments below. Looking at the entire nightmare, from public executions to social media shamings, do you think we as a society have truly become more humane? Or have we just found more efficient, more technologically advanced, and more psychologically insidious ways to inflict the same old punishments? Thank you for joining me on this grim, sarcastic, and hopefully eye-opening tour of humanity's worst impulses. History is not just a story of what happened back then, it's a mirror. And sometimes the reflection is a monster.